Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 13, Punishment. Within the vast, empty void of chaotic space, two streaks of multicolored light shot through the void, towards a blue-robed figure. Grandpa Beirut. Blue fire. Linley laughed as he looked at the two of them. How do you feel, after fusing the sovereign spark? Beirut sent while asking urgently. The nearby blue fire also asked, rather worried, how much did your power increase? This mission's goal was to allow Linley to become strong enough to surpass the chief sovereign of light. I feel excellent. Linley had a hint of a smile on his face. After fusing the third sovereign spark, the power of my will grew stronger yet again. After fusing 3 types of sovereign power, my fused sovereign power is 100 times more powerful than normal sovereign power. Just via my will and my fused sovereign power alone, I surpass an ordinary chief sovereign tenfold. Indeed. Linley's 4-way soul mutation had bestowed upon him 1 portion of will. Compared to ordinary lesser sovereigns, Linley had fused 2 more sovereign sparks, and so had gained 2 additional portions of will. All combined, Linley had gained a total of 3 additional portions of will. Lesser sovereign to intermediate sovereign to high sovereign. Generally speaking, the difference between each level was 100-fold in power, which was roughly equivalent to 2 portions of will. But for Linley, his fused sovereign power also made him 100 times stronger. And thus, without even taking the profound mysteries in account, the strength of his will and his body's energy made it so that Linley was 10 times stronger than an ordinary chief sovereign. The chief sovereign of the 4 edicts have paragons among them, and their Overgod artifacts are suited to their nature. I'm not completely confident in being able to defeat them, but I'm at least confident in being able to stay alive in front of them. Linley sent back. As for dealing with the chief sovereign of light, Augusta, his Overgod artifact isn't suited to his element. I'm confident in being able to kill him. Overgods were only divided into 4 edicts. Overgod artifacts were thus only divided into 4 types as well. But of course, neither Linley nor Augusta were perfectly suited to the nature of their Overgod artifacts. Haha, Beirut and Blue Fire exchanged glances, then couldn't help but laugh. They laughed in a very happy, excited manner. Nearly 20,000 years. Beirut was so excited, he couldn't control himself. It has been nearly 20,000 years since I became a sovereign. This entire time, I've turtled in the Yulon plain. Haha, I finally will be able to freely depart. There's no need to fear Augusta any further. Blue Fire let out a long sigh as well. Augusta. Linley had a hint of killing desire in his heart. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, had to be killed at some point. Augusta's death would make it so that nothing would stop Linley from saving his mother. He trusted that the other sovereigns of light wouldn't dare bar Linley's way. As the 3 sovereigns of Yulon were celebrating happily together, the distant chief sovereign of wind, Dia, had an extremely ugly look on his face as he was flying over at high speed. Dia had long, blazing golden hair. His long hair flowed with a faint green light, and his eyes were as fierce as a hawk's. His true form was, after all, the divine beast. Jadewing Gold Light Hawk. Utterly impudent. Dia was enraged. I shouted at him repeatedly to stop, but this Linley actually dared to forcibly kill Teresia. In addition, that weapon he used just now. A dark light flashed through Dia's golden eyes. Dia's divine sense range was extremely vast. Naturally, he had already discovered Linley's life Overgod sword. That is an Overgod artifact. And it is life attribute. There are no other possibilities. The 7th Overgod mission that has been issued since the creation of the universe, was completed by him. The Overgod artifact is in his hands, but it is wasted there. If I had it, given my power. Dia couldn't help but feel a desire to seize the treasure. This wasn't his fault. At the chief sovereign level, very few things were capable of attracting their interest. Overgod weapons, however, were chief amongst those things. Chief Sovereign, Linley actually killed Terracia and fused his wind-type Sovereign Spark. His behavior goes too far. The other sovereigns of wind sent towards Dia. Chief Sovereign, as I see it, we should take down Linley and have the chief sovereigns of the 4 edicts punish him. There were a total of 7 sovereigns of wind. Dia was the chief, and so naturally he was the leader of this element. Generally speaking, when chief sovereigns spoke, the other sovereigns would respectfully obey. Even someone as unruly and untamable as Terracia was incomparably respectful to the chief sovereign of wind, Dia. After countless years of this, Dia naturally had grown accustomed to being a high, lofty figure. Only the other 10 chief sovereigns were his equals. Linley had ignored his command. This naturally caused Dia to feel rather embarrassed. He had killed Terracia. Fused the Sovereign Spark. Without question, Linley's behavior was akin to slapping Dia in the face. Given the additional lure of the Overgod artifact, Dia came to his decision. Such impudence, such domineering behavior. He slaughtered another sovereign. His behavior goes too far. The rest of you, hurry and transmit this information to the other sovereigns, especially the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. You must deliver the message, this Linley has violated the Pact of Sovereigns. It should be the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts who punish him. The chief sovereign of wind, Dia, gave the order. Yes, chief sovereign. The other sovereigns all slashed through the void, returning to the divine wind plane. They began to quickly spread the word, informing the various sovereigns of the other elements. Humph, this Linley, the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, stared with his golden eyes into the distance as he continued to slash through the void. The multicolored flows of chaotic energy in chaotic space rushed about wildly at high speed, but Linley and the other 2 just stood there, laughing and chatting. The chief sovereign of wind, Dia, has arrived. Linley sent to Beirut and blew fire. Right at this moment, a green light leisurely shot over from far away. In virtually a single instant, roughly 100 meters away from Linley, it halted and transformed into a tall human figure. Dia's entire body was covered with a jade robe that was embroidered with golden threads. His jaw lifted slightly, and he swept his icy gaze towards them, a hint of arrogance in his eyes. Linley, do you admit to your crimes? Dia said icily. Admit to my crimes. What crimes have I committed? Even if I did commit crimes, what does that have to do with you, Dia? Linley stared straight back at Dia, showing not a hint of subservience. Dia was instantly infuriated. Linley, you have fused a wind-type sovereign spark, and are now a wind-type lesser sovereign. As a sovereign under my authority, what sort of an attitude are you now displaying towards me? Dia rebuked angrily. Dia's words were correct. 7 elemental laws, 4 edicts. Every trillion years, there would be planar wars. Each planar war was arranged by the chief sovereigns, and the sovereigns under their control would be quite obedient. After all, their difference in power was obvious. Any chief sovereign of any attribute could be considered the leader of their respective attribute. Soldiers would naturally need to be respectful to their leaders. Sorry. I, Linley, haven't just fused a wind-type sovereign spark. I've also fused an earth-type sovereign spark, and also a water-type sovereign spark. Doesn't this mean that I'm simultaneously a sovereign under the control of the chief sovereign of earth and the chief sovereign of water as well? Haha, I, Linley, am a single person, and yet I have to be divided up amongst 3 chief sovereigns. Linley laughed as he spoke. 3 sovereign sparks. Dia was surprised as well. Fusing an additional sovereign spark represented an increase in the power of will. Linley's strength could thus be imagined. After fusing 3 sovereign sparks, his will is comparable in strength to an intermediate sovereign. That Overgod artifact isn't aligned to his nature, he won't necessarily be a match for me. Dia instantly came to this conclusion. What, after killing a sovereign, you still dare be so brash? Dia rebuked angrily. You had best surrender and give yourself up. Follow me to go see the chief sovereigns. Surrender and give myself up? Forgive me for not being able to do this, just as Linley began to speak, and before he finished. Humph, you've already fused 3 sovereign sparks. Given your unfeeling, ruthless personality, as I see it, you will continue to slaughter other sovereigns. Since you won't surrender, then, the chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, gave a cold snort, then his body transformed into a ray of green light as he shot towards Linley. Beirut and Blue Fire hurriedly parted, moving far away towards 2 sides, for fear of being struck by any remnant power. I'll let you be my first test. Linley mused to himself. He stared calmly as the enemy charged towards him. The chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, wielded a long spear in one hand and a short spear in another. Moving at tremendous speed, Dia suddenly began to spin, then the golden short spear in his hand shot out at high speed. The short spear spun as well, causing a spinning series of spatial ripples to appear in the space around it. The strange thing was, space didn't shatter or tear apart. His power is focused and not yet released. Linley was secretly surprised. No chief sovereigns could be underestimated. The life Overgod sword appeared in Linley's hands. Not hesitating at all, he moved forward like a dragon leaving his cave. Although the tip of Linley's life Overgod sword was very minute, it pressed down like a mountain. Quite precisely, Linley's life Overgod sword's tip struck straight against the tip of the short spear. Bang! In the instant they collided, the energy contained within the spear instantly exploded forth. But so too did the power of Linley's life Overgod sword. Laws of the Earth, World Imploder. After 5,000 years of training, with respect to the laws of the Earth, Linley had fused 5 profound mysteries, then developed 3 techniques that were able to build off each other in power. Generally speaking, Linley wouldn't use his fused law attacks. These 3 techniques were meant for normal use. They covered up his true power. They were, World Breaker, World Imploder, and his most powerful, World Disintegrator. Whoosh! The golden spear was struck and sent flying back, while Linley himself was knocked backwards as well. You actually blocked my attack. The chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, grinned coldly, then shot forward at high speed. He swiped forward with one hand, seizing that golden short spear. A spear in each hand, Dia continued to draw close at lightning speed. Linley focused his attention. Skreek! Very suddenly, when Dia was roughly 100 meters away from Linley, he emitted a piercing screech. Behind him appeared the illusion of a terrifying divine hawk that was 10,000 meters in size. That golden, crested divine hawk seemed incredibly arrogant, and it stared icily with its golden eyes towards Linley. Innate divine ability, Demon Song. Ah! Linley felt as though a heavy hammer was smashing viciously against his soul. This attack was so powerful that cracks appeared on even the scaly soul membrane created by the coiling dragon ring. Die! Dia, after unleashing his innate divine ability attack, appeared in front of Linley, spinning like a tornado and striking towards Linley with both his long spear and his short spear. Annihilator! Dia unleashed his most powerful attack. The 2 spears bit down towards Linley like a pair of venomous dragons, but right at this moment, Linley, whose gaze had grown dim, suddenly stared back, his gaze instantly becoming as sharp as a knife. Ring ring ring, the life Overgod sword began to shudder. What's going on? Dia was greatly shocked. He could sense a terrifying restrictive power bind him down. The most powerful of the 3 attacks was World Disintegrator. It could be said to be the advanced version of Microcosm. This attack involved 5 fused profound mysteries. Compared with Linley's sword intent attack, it was almost on par. Clatter clatter. A colliding sound rang out repeatedly. Within 10 meters, the space within a spherical region completely collapsed. Dia was knocked back flying, while Linley himself was also sent flying back. You actually, Dia was truly stunned now. Linley stared coldly at Dia. You want to kill me? This Dia's innate divine ability was a very unique, pure sound attack that struck directly against the soul. Especially when paired with the chief sovereign's will, the power of the attack was so great that even the defensive membrane of the coiling dragon ring was cracked. Fortunately, Linley's spiritual energy came from his triple-fused sovereign power, and was 100 times mightier than ordinary sovereign power. And so, Linley had withstood it. An ordinary sovereign, even a chief sovereign, would be in mortal danger from Dia's attack. First the innate divine ability, and then his strongest material attack, Annihilator. The chief sovereign of wind, Dia, clearly had used this double attack with the intention of killing Linley. I didn't imagine that after fusing 3 sovereign sparks, by relying on your Overgod artifact, you would be able to block my attacks. Dia let out a snicker, but in his heart, his thirst for the Overgod artifact grew only stronger. 2 consecutive techniques. This really is an incredible killing technique. Linley stared at Dia, then let out a cold laugh. Dia, you've unleashed your supreme attack, but I haven't displayed mine yet. Dia's face couldn't help but change slightly. He couldn't help but flash backwards, retreating 1,000 kilometers away. Linley calmly watched Dia retreat. Actually, if he wanted to kill Dia, Linley would have done so long ago. Just now, from start to finish, during his battle with Dia, Linley had only used Earth-type sovereign power, and not his fused sovereign power. The power that Linley had just displayed was a mere 100th of his true power. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 14, The Gathering of the Sovereigns. This Dia is indeed cautious. Linley mused to himself. At this moment, Beirut and Blue Fire flew over from far away. Beirut sent mentally, Linley, were you holding back your power just now? Based on what Beirut and Blue Fire knew, given Linley's power, killing Dia should be fairly easy. After all, of the 7 elemental chief sovereigns, the chief sovereign of light was the strongest. If he couldn't even kill Dia, how could he kill Augusta? Just now, I didn't use my fused sovereign power. Linley sent back. Indeed. Blue Fire and Beirut both let out relieved sighs. For now, it is best to hide your power. I imagine that after you killed Terracia, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts will come shortly. Hide your power for now, that will make it easier to bluff your way through later. Beirut sent. Linley was planning to do precisely this. I don't want to reveal my power and frighten Augusta into fleeing. Linley stared into the distance. Dia has already returned to the divine wind plane. Let us go as well. It is time to face the chief sovereigns. Beirut and Blue Fire agreed as well. He had killed a sovereign. He had to at least have a reason or an excuse for it. At the very least, he couldn't violate the Pact of Sovereigns. If you had an excuse, but fled after committing the killing, even if you did have a reason for what you did, most likely the chief sovereigns of the 4 edicts would be angry. Upon being pursued and attacked by the 4 mighty chief sovereigns of the edicts, that would be disastrous. Even the current Linley wasn't confident he could defeat the 4 of them. Whoosh! Linley flew towards the borders of the divine wind plane, then ripped an opening in it. Linley, Beirut, and Blue Fire, these 3 sovereigns, flew through. The divine wind plane was vast and boundless. Linley's group of 3 withdrew a metallic life form and changed it into a ship that hovered above the sea. The 3 thus leisurely chatted aboard the ship, quietly awaiting the arrival of the chief sovereigns. Linley actually dares to stay here. Dia's divine sense had located Linley, and in his heart, he felt a hint of rage. Time-wise, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts should have received the news by now. Given the speed at which they travel, in half a day or so, they should arrive in my divine wind plane. Dia currently had a belly full of fire. Actually, this was understandable. First of all, he was the chief sovereign of wind. Linley was a sovereign of wind, and yet was so unruly. The chief sovereign of wind's dignity had been violated. Naturally, he was dissatisfied. Second, before his very eyes, and even as he shouted, Linley had killed Teresia. How could Dia not be unhappy? And third, he wanted the Overgod artifact, and yet hadn't acquired it. Fourth, Linley's power made him feel threatened. This fourth point is what caused him to feel enmity towards Linley. Only. Although he felt enmity towards Linley, Linley didn't care about Dia at all. The infernal realm, of the four higher planes. Deep in the chaotic sea. Chief sovereign of destruction, that new sovereign Linley, Beirut, and a sovereign of fire arrived at our divine wind plane. Linley chased after and attacked Teresia, all the way into chaotic space. He killed Teresia, and then fused the wind-type sovereign spark. Linley has completely violated the pact we set down previously. A voice traveled across 10 billion kilometers and directly entered the depths of the chaotic sea. Linley killed Teresia? Amusing, amusing. A figure clad in black light shot out, instantly emerging from the depths of the sea. It has been so long since I've met those three. It's time we had a good chat. The blurry figure flew directly towards the closest teleportation array. The divine light plane. The air above the gods' jail sea. Swish. A ray of white light instantly pierced through the heavens, so fast that even high gods couldn't see it clearly. Augustus' dazzling golden hair fluttered, and a hint of mirth was in his eyes. Haha, I truly didn't expect that Beirut, Blue Fire, and Linley would dare leave the Yulon plain, and even dare to chase and attack Teresia. This truly is an opportunity bestowed to me by the heavens. Augusta, upon hearing the news, had instantly hurried towards the teleportation array. However, according to this news, Teresia actually was killed. This Linley was strong enough to kill Teresia. Augusta was rather puzzled. The news that had come from the divine wind plane hadn't stated that Linley was in possession of an Overgod weapon. Swoosh. Augusta shot towards the distant teleportation array. Linley became a sovereign. He actually killed a sovereign and fused his spark. The sovereigns who received this news were all stunned, one after the other. They all hurriedly moved at full speed towards the teleportation arrays, hastening towards the divine wind plane. Those who received the news the earliest and who moved the fastest were naturally the four chief sovereigns of the edicts. Next came the other chief sovereigns. Lastly came the various sovereigns. Sovereigns were normally quite bored. Their long, leisurely lives had made it so that they had unlimited amounts of time to waste. For one sovereign to kill another sovereign and then fuse the sovereign spark? The effect was similar to a murder occurring in a small town of mortals. One could imagine how much attention it drew. All the sovereigns who received this information, without exception, hastened towards the divine wind plane. The divine wind plane. One of the three teleportation array areas, the peak of Windflow Mountain. Rumble, a blurry aura lit up. A blurry figure emerged from the array, very naturally emanating a terrifying aura. Who is this? The surrounding soldiers held their breaths, feeling the pressure from this aura. All of them stared in surprise and terror towards the blurry figure within the teleportation array. As soon as the light of the teleportation array vanished, the blurry figure suddenly soared into the skies, and in a flash, departed, moving so fast that even the high god soldiers nearby couldn't see what happened clearly. This was a sovereign. Definitely a sovereign. Speed that even I couldn't see clearly, it could only be a sovereign. All of them cried out in surprise. At this moment, far away, in midair, there was a beautiful young maiden with fiery red hair, whose entire body was covered by a violet robe. She was staring towards the northeast. She laughed, and two little cute dimples appeared on her face. In a few thousand short years, I didn't expect that Linley would not only become a sovereign, he would even kill another sovereign. This little fellow, amusing, amusing. From the day he was born until now, most likely less than 10,000 years have passed. This little fellow's rate of improvement truly is miraculous. The beautiful red-haired maiden smiled as she spoke to herself. Given the age of the chief sovereign of death, for her to refer to Linley as a little fellow was indeed quite reasonable. The beautiful red-haired maiden turned to look. What a coincidence. She actually arrived at the same teleportation array as I did. Hurry up a bit. The beautiful red-haired maiden sent mentally. Don't be impatient. The other two haven't arrived yet. A gentle voice rang out, and a jade green light instantly appeared by the side of the beautiful red-haired woman. This was a beautiful middle-aged woman dressed in a long green robe. Her eyebrows were shaped like crescents, while her eyes seemed to glitter like the stars. Her smile was more than enough to intoxicate anyone. The strange thing was, she didn't emit any spiritual aura at all. Her spiritual aura was completely contracted. One could imagine how profound her accomplishments were with regards to the soul. She was one of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, the chief sovereign of life. Elder sister. The chief sovereign of life smiled and said, long time no see. Right, it has indeed been a long time. The last time we met was during the previous planar wars, 1 trillion years ago. Right, yeah, let me warn you in advance. This matter involves Linley. I personally watched this little fellow grow up. Unless it is necessary, don't kill him. The beautiful red-haired maiden said. Don't worry. The smile of the chief sovereign of life was always that graceful. However, if Linley's actions completely violated the pact, then there's nothing I can do either. Right. I won't put you in a bad position. Hey, those two have come as well, one after the other. However, they didn't come through the same array as we did. The beautiful red-haired maiden looked into the distance. Come, let's head out first. Immediately, the 2 females of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts flew at high speed towards Linley's group of 3. Upon discovering that the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts had entered the divine wind plane, the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, naturally immediately went to receive them. In terms of power, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts vastly surpassed the 7 elemental chief sovereigns. In terms of status, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts also were far above them. When the other 7 chief sovereigns encountered the 4 of them, they would all salute. From this, one could tell how high their status was. Dia stared into the distance at the 4 rays of light flying over. He immediately went to salute them. Greetings, your excellencies. Of the 4 newcomers, 2 were women. The chief sovereign of death, who looked like a beautiful maiden, was actually as old as the netherworld itself. After all, she was the very first living creature of the netherworld. This was why the chief sovereign of life addressed her as elder sister. Most likely, amongst the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, only the chief sovereign of destruction was comparable to the chief sovereign of death. Dia, come along with us. A white-haired, white-robed elder laughed calmly. Of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, the chief sovereigns of life and fate were able to completely contract their auras. If one shut one's eyes, one would be completely unable to sense these 2 as being present. Yes. Dia humbly followed behind the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Above the sea, the metallic life form, in the shape of a vessel, was extremely stable. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts have arrived. Linley stood up and stared into the distance. Beirut and Bluefire raised their heads and looked over as well. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Were they able to detect your divine sense, Linley? Beirut sent and asked. They shouldn't have been. Just now, I first used my fused sovereign power to make a test. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts didn't react at all. And then, I used Earth-type sovereign power, only then did they notice me. Linley sent back. Although he had an advantage in divine sense, Linley was still very wary of the four chief sovereigns of the edicts. As far as power was concerned, not a single one of the four chief sovereigns of the edicts was weak. They are coming. Linley's gaze was already focused on 5 figures in the distance. A beautiful red-haired maiden, a gloomy, black-robed man, a beautiful middle-aged green-robed woman, and a white-haired, white-robed elder. These 4 were the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. The chief sovereign of life and chief sovereign of fate, their auras are completely retracted, and not a hint of them leak out. It seems as though they have both reached the paragon level in the profound mysteries of the laws. Linley felt very vigilant. The current him was most likely not yet a match for them. The chief sovereign of death was the first living creature to exist in the netherworld. Her innate divine ability probably is not any weaker than Beirut's. The chief sovereign of destruction, judging from the attitude the other 3 chief sovereigns have towards him, he most likely isn't the weakest of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Linley's heart was filled with astonishment. Every single one of these 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts was unfathomable. Greetings to you, chief sovereigns. Beirut immediately saluted. Chief sovereigns. Linley and Bluefire saluted as well. When faced with the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, even the chief sovereigns of the 7 elemental laws would salute. At this point in time, Linley didn't act with arrogance and try to put himself on the same level as the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Linley, we meet again. The beautiful red-haired maiden laughed as she looked at Linley. The first time we met at the Abyssal Mountain, you had just barely reached the commander level. The second time we met, you had already become a paragon. This third time, you've actually become a sovereign. Linley should have trained for less than 10,000 years by now. The white-robed, white-haired elder of the 4 smiled as his gaze fell upon Linley. It seemed so amiable. You truly are excellent. Linley hadn't expected that as soon as he encountered the 4, 2 of the chief sovereigns of the edicts show him favor. This caused the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, to feel worry and anger in his heart. Chief sovereigns, this Linley killed Teresia, Dia said hurriedly. The beautiful red-haired maiden smiled slightly. More and more sovereigns are coming. Let's wait for them to all arrive before we speak. Right at this moment, the other sovereigns arrived. First came the sovereigns of wind, then the various chief sovereigns of the other elements such as Augusta. Then came some other sovereigns as well. Less than an hour passed between the first and final arrivals, and during this period of time, more than 60 sovereigns arrived. It must be understood that there were only 77 sovereigns to begin with, or, to be precise, sovereign clones. For example, Linley had 3 sovereign clones by himself. Aside from a few sovereigns who were on material planes or within their own divine planes, all the sovereigns who had received the news had come. So many sovereigns. In the past, I've never seen so many sovereigns gather together. Beirut sent with a laugh, and Linley looked around as well. The sovereigns were clustered together in groups of 2 or 3, either floating in the air or standing atop boats. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 15, Covetous Intent. Rumble, the waves of the sea continued to roll forward gently. Linley raised his head, sweeping it past Augusta and Dia. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, and the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, both looked back at Linley with gazes that held malice in them. In his heart, Linley just snickered. Augusta probably still has a desire to kill me. After that last battle, Dia probably feels enmity for me as well. Dia I can ignore, but as for Augusta, I'll let him live happily for a bit longer. After the other chief sovereigns leave, I will kill Augusta. The other chief sovereigns wouldn't just watch Linley kill Augusta and do nothing about it. He had already waited for thousands of years. What was another moment? Linley. Beirut. At this moment, the Redbud Sovereign and the Blood Ridge Sovereign both flew over, laughing while waving to him. Linley, you really know how to make trouble. The blood-rich sovereign laughed as he spoke mentally to him. How short a period of time has it been? And yet, you've killed Teresia. If you killed him, you killed him. However, Linley, you should have prepared an excuse for when the chief sovereigns question you, yes. The Redbud sovereign looked at Linley. Linley laughed and nodded. We'll have to trouble the two of you to help, soon. Beirut laughed while speaking mentally to them. We won't be able to help out that much. Everything is up to the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. The one right next to you, that's the blue fire you mentioned to me last time, right? The blood-rich sovereign looked towards blue fire. Blue fire, I am called Boson. Mr. Boson. Blue fire said modestly. How often did 60+ sovereigns have the chance to all gather together? The conversation between the various sovereigns right now was quite lively. All right, it is time to discuss Linley's affairs. A cold voice descended from on high. The speaker was the chief sovereign of destruction. The words of the chief sovereign of destruction instantly caused all conversation to halt. It grew quiet. Everyone. Beirut laughed. Everyone, please, all of you, sit. After you sit, we can discuss the matter between Linley and Teresia. As he spoke, with a crackling sound, the metallic life-form that had been in the shape of a giant boat began to transform again. The wide, spacious deck suddenly began to grow several chairs. There were 65 in total, and the chairs were arranged into an enormous circle. Because it was in a circle, there were no differences in terms of status for seating arrangements. Everyone, let's sit. The beautiful, violet-robed, red-haired maiden gave the order coldly. The chief sovereign of Death's words caused the 60+ sovereigns to all descend from the skies or fly over from other parts of the boat and move towards the seats. Everyone casually chose their own seats and sat down. Linley, Beirut, and Blue Fire were seated next to each other. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Linley swept the 4 with his gaze. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts were all seated next to each other as well. The 3 of them are all here. What a coincidence. After the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts leave, I'll kill all 3 of them. Augusta gave Linley's group of 3 a glance as he murmured to himself. Right at this moment, a gentle voice rang out. Everyone, although the 4 overgods have not forbidden us from killing each other, fusing an additional sovereign spark means gaining an additional portion of will. If we don't limit battles amongst ourselves, most likely the lesser sovereigns and intermediate sovereigns will never have peace. Thus, in the past, the other 3 chief sovereigns of the edicts and myself set up the pact. If a lower rank sovereign has not offended a higher rank sovereign, the higher rank sovereign is not to wantonly slaughter the lower ranked one. Those who violate this will be jointly pursued and killed by the 4 of us. Only sovereigns as the same level of power are permitted to fight amongst each other. The speaker was the jade-robed chief sovereign of life. The chief sovereign of life's voice was very gentle, even when discussing the pact, her voice flowed like the waters of a spring, making the listeners feel peaceful. The sea wind blew, but the ship atop the waves was extremely stable, and the sovereigns seated atop it were all listening quietly. Today, however, Linley killed the lesser sovereign of wind, Teresia. The chief sovereign of life swept Linley with her gaze, her tone abruptly changing. However, Linley is only a lesser sovereign as well. Linley, hearing this, couldn't help but feel delighted. This chief sovereign of life seemed to be helping him. Your Excellency. Suddenly, a voice rang out. HRM. The chief sovereign of life's warm, gentle gaze fell upon the speaker. The speaker was the chief sovereign of wind, Dia. Dia's golden gaze was trained upon the chief sovereign of life, but he said with respect, according to that pact. The evaluation of a person's power rank isn't just divided up into simply lesser, intermediate, and high sovereign sparks, rather, it is based on true power. For example, Any of the four divine beasts of the past were just lesser sovereigns on their own, but as a whole, they became referred to as being at the chief sovereign level. This was because they were powerful. When experts battled, joining forces wasn't always of great use. Four lesser sovereigns that joined forces still wouldn't be able to overcome an intermediate sovereign. But the four divine beasts were clearly different. Thus, during that pact, it was specially established that the four divine beasts, as a unit, were at the chief sovereign level. As for this Linley, in terms of power, the sovereign of wind, Dia, let out a self-mocking chuckle. I'm afraid that you'll laugh at me, but not long ago, I intended to go capture this Linley, so as to allow the four of you, your excellencies, to interrogate him. However, I didn't expect that after Linley fused the wind-type sovereign spark, I was unable to do anything to him, even when attacking him at my full strength. How can this be? Instantly, a shocked uproar of noise. The sovereigns who had hurried here from the other planes all knew that Linley had killed Terracia, but they weren't clear on Linley's fight against the chief sovereign of wind, Dia. The main reason was, when Dia had ordered his sovereigns of wind to go spread the news, the battle between him and Linley hadn't started yet. Even if Linley fused an additional wind-type sovereign spark, he would at most have an extra portion of will. How could he be able to defeat you, Dia? The difference between a lesser sovereign and a high sovereign is very great. A chorus of disbelieving voices rang out. These sovereigns couldn't believe Dia's words. An intermediate sovereign was nearly 100 times stronger than a lesser sovereign, a difference of 2 portions of will. As for high sovereigns and lesser sovereigns, the difference was even greater. Linley didn't just fuse a wind-type sovereign spark. Prior to this, he had already fused 2 sovereign sparks. Dia said. A single person who fused 3 sovereign sparks. Even the white-robed, white-haired elder, the chief sovereign of fate, couldn't help but look at Linley. Can it be that Linley has killed other sovereigns prior to this? Some people immediately said. There are still a number of sovereigns who didn't come today. Perhaps. Linley just quietly watched this group of sovereigns chatter, while from Linley's side, Beirut suddenly laughed in a clear voice. Everyone, I am Beirut. I trust that everyone has heard of the events of nearly 20,000 years ago. Back then, I acquired 4 sovereign sparks. I and this gentleman next to me, Blue Fire, each used a spark. We let Linley fuse the other 2 sparks, and so Linley has only killed a single sovereign, Terracia. Quite a few sovereigns looked towards Beirut, and they all fell silent. News of what Beirut had done nearly 20,000 years ago had spread quite quickly amongst the sovereigns. Dia, even if Linley fused 3 sovereign sparks, he would just have 2 more portions of will than an ordinary lesser sovereign, and would be comparable to an intermediate sovereign. How could he have been a match for you? A man with long blue hair and fish scales on his forehead laughed while speaking. Everyone. Don't forget, Linley is a paragon. The blood-rich sovereign smiled as he reminded them all. Even if he is a paragon, would an intermediate sovereign paragon be able to defeat Dia? The other sovereigns refuted. Everyone. The chief sovereign of wind, Dia, intentionally let out a sigh. I unleashed my supreme attack, but still couldn't injure him. In fact, I wasn't even able to force Linley to use the innate divine ability of the Azure Dragon clan. The reason why Linley is so powerful is primarily because he has an Overgod artifact. An instant uproar. An Overgod artifact. The sovereigns, including the many sovereigns who had only been watching in amusement and had yet to say anything, were all stunned. The chief sovereigns, Augusta included, immediately turned lightning fast to stare at Linley. It is true. Linley, faced with the gazes of these people, nodded and admitted it. A single stone which aroused a 1,000-meter wave. He actually has an Overgod artifact. The sovereigns who had been treating this as an amusing diversion now completely changed their attitudes. By relying on an Overgod artifact, Linley was only able to have a slight advantage over Dia. A golden-horned man with the seal of a lightning bolt on his forehead mused to himself. For the Overgod artifact to fall into his hands is a complete waste. If I were to gain that Overgod artifact, given my power, I would have a chance at becoming comparable to the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. This person was the chief sovereign of lightning. The chief sovereign of lightning had another sovereign clone, making it so that the chief sovereign of lightning naturally had an additional portion of will. His power surpassed the other chief sovereigns, but the chief sovereign of light had an Overgod artifact. Thus, amongst the 7 elemental chief sovereigns, the chief sovereign of light was number 1, while the chief sovereign of lightning was number 2. The difference between them, however, wasn't that great. If the chief sovereign of lightning acquired an Overgod artifact, he would instantly surpass the chief sovereign of light and even be able to pose a threat to the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Overgod artifact. The chief sovereign of lightning was already pondering how to take the Overgod artifact away. This puny little Linley, even relying on the Overgod artifact, only has average power. He is no threat. The greatest problem right now is the other chief sovereigns. I want to take the Overgod artifact, but I imagine the other chief sovereigns wouldn't be willing to accept this. The chief sovereign of lightning swept his gaze across the other chief sovereigns. Indeed, the other chief sovereigns were intrigued as well. An Overgod artifact. If they acquired it, they would surpass the other chief sovereigns. Humph, all of you want to fight over it. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, laughed coldly in his heart. With me here, the only thing the rest of you can do is dream about it. However, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts will be trouble. Augusta was also worried about the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. These simple words from Dia, exposing the fact that Linley possessed an Overgod artifact, caused all of the chief sovereigns who were qualified to fight over such a treasure to be intrigued. Linley, I'm not able to kill you. But the other chief sovereigns are. Dia was very pleased with what he had wrought. Linley wasn't worried at all. He swept the 11 chief sovereigns with his gaze. I imagine that quite a few chief sovereigns harbor greedy intentions in their heart. However, after I kill Augusta, I imagine that these chief sovereigns will be so frightened, they won't dare do anything afterwards. Linley didn't feel the slightest hint of worry. He had only revealed 1/100th of his true power. All of the sovereigns present understood that the 7th Overgod mission that had been issued since the creation of the universe had been fulfilled by Linley. During the previous period of time, the various sovereigns had all been fooled by him. However, nobody quibbled about this. If a high god had fooled the sovereigns would naturally be furious and take revenge. But Linley's power was now on the chief sovereign level. Who would take revenge? In addition, the situation was currently quite delicate. Quite a few of the 11 chief sovereigns felt greedy intentions towards Linley's Overgod artifact. But all of the chief sovereigns knew how the others felt as well. They were afraid that they would be the first to strike, but in the end, let the benefit go to the others. Thus, all of them were extremely cautious. Linley fused 3 sovereign sparks, is a paragon, and has an Overgod artifact. He does indeed have the power to fight Dia. However, the chief sovereign of life's voice grew cold and fierce. Just because you are powerful, you can murder a lesser sovereign of wind? This is completely against our original pact. Linley spoke out. Chief sovereign, before I fused the wind-type sovereign spark, I wasn't that powerful. The chief sovereign of destruction said calmly, even before you fused the wind-type sovereign spark, you had already surpassed an ordinary intermediate sovereign. To kill Teresia was a violation of the pact. Everyone. The nearby Beirut hurriedly rose. There are 2 things I must say. Originally, when Linley was still a high god, Teresia wanted to attack and kill Linley in the infernal realm. Fortunately, the blood-rich sovereign, Bosan, stopped him. The second thing was that when Linley was passing through chaotic space to return from the Okerlund plane to the Yulon plane, he was assaulted by Terracia midway through. If it hadn't been for myself and Blue Fire going all out, Linley would have been killed long ago. Terracia had repeatedly acted against Linley. For Linley to take revenge shouldn't be considered against the pact. The black-robed chief sovereign of destruction gave Beirut a glance. He assaulted Linley in chaotic space? Who can testify to this? Your Excellency. At this moment, a voice rang out. Although Linley and I have some enmity between us, I have to admit, back then, Terracia did in fact assault Linley's group. I saw this through divine sense, there was definitely no mistake. Linley couldn't help but turn to look. The speaker was, amazingly enough, the chief sovereign of light, Augusta. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 16, The Verdict. Augusta is helping me. No matter how calm Linley was, he was still startled. But immediately afterwards, Linley understood the reason. He couldn't help but laugh coldly to himself. Help me? He probably is worried that I will be judged as being guilty and be killed by the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. By then, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts will decide on what to do with my Overgod artifact. He won't have the chance. Just after Augusta spoke. Chief sovereigns. Yet another person, a sovereign of fire with tousled, straw-like hair, spoke out. In the infernal realm, it is true that Terracia had made trouble for Linley, trying to force Linley to hand over the 9 soul pearls and the Overgod decree. Afterwards, it was the blood-rich sovereign, Boson, who appeared to protect Linley. I can attest to this as well. Linley glanced at that sovereign of fire, puzzled. He is a lesser sovereign of fire. I have no relationship at all with him, and he isn't qualified to try and seize the Overgod artifact. Why is he helping me as well? 2 sovereigns had spoken out in a row. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts looked at each other, engaging in a private discussion through divine sense. I was the one to intervene. Naturally, I can bear witness as well. The blood-rich sovereign, Boson, laughed. Since that's the case, the chief sovereign of life was about to pronounce the verdict. But right at this moment. Your Excellency, back then, although Terracia might have gone a bit too far, he was a sovereign, while Linley was merely a high god. The sovereign of wind, Dia, said in an unhappy, icy voice. Even if a sovereign applies a bit of force to a high god, what's the big deal? In addition, Linley didn't even die. What, do we sovereigns now have to be courteous to deities? If we offend them a bit, they will be qualified to take revenge upon us. No matter how wrongly a sovereign treats a deity, it is only natural and proper. Dia spoke in a solemn voice. The sovereigns fell silent. They had to admit that this was reasonable as well. In the eyes of sovereigns, deities were indeed nothing more than ants. Even if they lowered themselves to kill deities, it was just a matter of the sovereign losing face. There was no one who would say the sovereign was wrong. After Linley became a sovereign, Terracia didn't offend him any further. The chief sovereign of wind, Dia, snorted coldly. Given the situation, Linley had no excuse to kill Terracia. Dia understood that his chances of acquiring the Overgod artifact were low. And so, he wanted Linley to die right away. Dying in the hands of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts would be good. Haha, Linley rose to his feet, staring at Dia. With a snicker, he said, Dia, what sort of logic is this? A sovereign killing a deity is never wrong? This judgment of yours is only from the viewpoint of sovereigns. But from the standpoint of deities. If a lofty, exalted sovereign were to come kill them, wouldn't they feel hate, feel resentment? It isn't that deities refuse to avenge themselves, it is that they don't have the power to avenge themselves. Humph. Even wild beasts with low intelligence, at the point of death, will bite back, much less deities. Linley said solemnly, Deities don't have the power to take revenge, and so they will naturally die with a heart filled with resentment. But if they have the power to take revenge, they absolutely will. In addition, the Pact of the Four Chief Sovereigns of the Edicts also mentioned the issue of whether or not there was enmity between the two sides. I ask you, was there enmity between myself and Teresia or not? Linley asked. Dia couldn't help but fall silent. Enough. An ancient, warm voice rang out. The speaker was the chief sovereign of fate. Dia's logic is flawed. Enmity is enmity. How can enmity be divided up according to time or level? When one suffers humiliation when one is weak, can it be that after they grow powerful, they cannot take revenge? This matter comes to an end here. This situation is quite clear to me. I view Linley as not being in violation of the pact. Not guilty. The words of the chief sovereign of fate made it so that the other sovereigns no longer dared to argue. I, too, view him as being not guilty. Everyone else. The chief sovereign of life smiled as she looked around. Not guilty. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, laughed. Not guilty. A black-haired, black-robed man spoke out. Not guilty. Of the 11 chief sovereigns, aside from Dia, the other 10 all viewed Linley as being not guilty. Actually, generally speaking, as long as the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts had pronounced Linley as being without guilt, that was enough. However, face still had to be given. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts would still give the other chief sovereigns a chance to speak. A clear laughter rang out. It was the violet-robed chief sovereign of death. She swept the area with her gaze, then chortled, "Since everyone agrees, then we have come to a conclusion with regards to the matter of Linley killing Teresia. Linley has not violated the Pact of Sovereigns. Not guilty. This matter is ended. Everyone can leave now." At this moment, Linley let out a sigh of relief. Linley. This was over even faster than I thought it would be. Today, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts didn't make any trouble for you, and aside from Dia, the other 6 chief sovereigns weren't hard on you either. There were almost no voices of dissent. Beirut sent mentally. You have to thank the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts for how easily this matter was concluded. I understand. Linley nodded. Actually, in a matter like this, whether one was found guilty or not guilty was completely up to the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Today, it was quite clear that although the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts occasionally spoke in severe tones, in reality, they were partial towards Linley. This matter was at an end. The 60-plus sovereigns bade each other farewell, then left, either on their own or in small groups. However, there was something quite odd. Not a single one of the 11 chief sovereigns were in a hurry to leave. Dia was the chief sovereign of wind. For him to remain in the divine wind plane made sense. But why weren't the other chief sovereigns leaving? I wonder where Linley is going? I have to follow him and see which teleportation portal he goes through. That will make it easier to follow him. Augusta had this plan, but in his heart, he still didn't feel confident. However, the other chief sovereigns, including the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, are actually still here. None of them are in a rush to leave. Can it be that the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts are also interested in taking the Overgod artifact? Of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, the chief sovereign of life, death, and destruction all had material weapons as their Overgod artifacts. Only the chief sovereign of fate was in possession of a soul-protecting Overgod artifact. Atop the deck of the ship, the Redbud sovereign flew over, then quietly said through divine sense, "Linley. Boson and I will leave now. We won't be able to help much by remaining here. But, by the looks of it, the chief sovereigns have remained, most likely because the majority of them have covetous desires upon your Overgod artifact. Thus, you must be careful." I understand. Thank you. Linley sent. Thank me for what? I'm not able to help you. These chief sovereigns, given your power, you will be able to deal with most of them. The ones you need to beware of are the chief sovereign of light, the chief sovereign of lightning, and the chief sovereign of fate. The other three chief sovereigns of the edicts already have Overgod weapons, and don't need to fight over another one. However, the chief sovereign of fate rarely fights and rarely offends others. He might not engage. And thus, you need to worry more about the other two. Understood. Linley recognized this logic. Beirut, Bluefire, Linley, we'll leave now. The Redbud Sovereign and the Bloodridge Sovereign bade Linley's group farewell, then left. Linley and the other two exchanged glances. Linley, what will you choose to do? Beirut sent. Can I possibly cower back at a time like this? Linley sent. Grandpa Beirut, Bluefire, let's head towards the teleportation arrays now. You two will first return to the Yulon Plain, just to be safe. After I kill Augusta, I will notify you. Beirut and Bluefire exchanged a glance, then nodded and agreed. They understood that by remaining here, they would only impact Linley. It's for the best. However, Linley, your true power truly has surpassed that of the 7 elemental chief sovereigns. Still, you need to be careful, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts are truly too powerful. They are staying here as well, and I am worried that something might happen. Thus, even if you want to attack and kill Augusta, you have to be cautious and alert. Once the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts appear to have a desire to kill you, immediately flee. Beirut sent. Beirut and Bluefire didn't want to see Linley being killed by the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. After all, Linley was the pillar of the 3 sovereigns of Yulon. Don't worry. Linley laughed. Come, let's go to the teleportation array. Linley's group of 3 immediately headed out, flying towards one of the teleportation arrays. Linley is headed out. The chief sovereigns who had remained here hesitated only slightly, and then 2 of them began to follow after Linley's group of 3. Augusta intentionally hesitated for a while longer, then flew towards the teleportation array as well. Given the flying speed of Linley's group of 3, they move at less than 1/10 of my speed. Augusta, although confident, didn't dare to underestimate the chief sovereigns of the other laws. Those chief sovereigns all had their own supreme techniques. Of the 7 elemental chief sovereigns, in terms of speed, I'm the fastest. I will have an advantage in seizing the Overgod artifact. The chief sovereign of lightning turned to glance at the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Of those 4, 3 have Overgod weapons already and shouldn't intervene. As for the chief sovereign of fate, given his personality, he probably won't go fight over a treasure. The chief sovereign of lightning also flew over, trailing after Linley's group. The chief sovereigns all began to fly away, and even the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, began to fly back to his base. Only the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts remained. The 4 of them still didn't leave. At this moment, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts were currently chatting privately through divine sense with each other. Wadrid Wuti Elata, you are as confident as that. The chief sovereign of death smiled charmingly towards the chief sovereign of destruction. Orloff Aofu, do you agree or not? The chief sovereign of destruction was looking at the white-haired, white-robed chief sovereign of fate. And then, the chief sovereign of destruction let out a cold laugh. If you are afraid and won't agree, then forget it. Haha, if you are going to talk like this, and given how good the conditions we have agreed on are, how can I not accept? The chief sovereign of fate still had a smile on his face. Excellent. The chief sovereign of destruction nodded slightly. Elder sister, it seems we'll have something fun to watch. The chief sovereign of life had a smile appear on her face as well. While the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts were discussing this matter, Linley's group of 3 had already flown very far away, and were close to the teleportation array at Windflow Mountain. Windflow Mountain is up ahead. Grandpa Beirut, Bluefire, we'll part ways here. Linley hovered in the air. Be careful. Beirut and Bluefire both felt nervous for Linley. And then, Beirut and Bluefire both flew towards Windflow Mountain, teleporting through it and returning to the Yulon Plain. Even if battle was to erupt, the two of them weren't qualified to interfere. Because the only ones who were Chief Sovereign level figures. Humph. All 6 of them are following me. Linley easily saw through his divine sense that there were 6 Chief Sovereigns following him. Fortunately, the 4 Chief Sovereigns of the edicts haven't come. Linley let out a sigh of relief. The only ones he feared were the 4 Chief Sovereigns of the edicts. Moments later, the first to arrive was the Chief Sovereign of Lightning. Linley. The Chief Sovereign of Lightning smiled as he flew over and greeted Linley warmly. Oh, you live up to being the Chief Sovereign of Lightning. Your speed is so fast. I'm busy, though, so I won't disturb you for now. Linley smiled as he moved away, flying past the Chief Sovereign of Lightning. The Chief Sovereign of Lightning's face changed slightly. Linley just drew away from him, flying directly towards the second figure that was flying over, the Chief Sovereign of Light. Linley. Augusta frowned. For Linley to voluntarily approach him aroused his suspicions, but then, he understood. Humph. Who cares what he wants? Linley's power is just average. Even if he is a bit more powerful than I expected, he won't be a threat to me. Augusta. Linley laughed as he went to welcome him. Is there something you need, Linley? Augusta was still quite friendly. I want to thank you for your help just now, Augusta. Linley smiled. I did what was proper. Augusta laughed. Augusta, I have something important to do in the Divine Light Plane. By then, I'll probably need your help. I wonder if you would be willing to help me, Augusta. Linley said with a laugh. Augusta's heart lurched. He is going to go with me to the Divine Light Plane. Augusta was now completely puzzled. Can it be that Linley thinks that the little bit of power he has is enough to threaten me? Humph, it makes sense. In his battle against Dia, he didn't even use his innate divine ability. Since Linley seeks death, I can't be blamed. Augusta immediately laughed. Haha, of course I can. Then let us go together. Linley laughed calmly. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 17, Tenfold Victor's Reward. Linley's method was quite direct, but the effect was superb. Actually, Linley wasn't worried at all. The chances that Augusta would refuse him were less than 10%. Even if Augusta was extremely cautious and refused to let Linley go with him, Linley himself could head by himself to the Divine Light Plane and search for Augusta, then kill him. Linley, why are you going to the Divine Light Plane? Augusta laughed and asked. When we arrive, you will know. Linley didn't respond. The two flew at very high speed, arriving in the air atop Windflow Mountain in the blink of an eye. Augusta also noticed the Chief Sovereign of Lightning, not too far away. He couldn't help but laugh coldly, such a pity. Given your power, if Linley wasn't traveling with me, you would have a chance. But now, you have no chance at all. Augusta glanced sideways at Linley. He was still rather suspicious of Linley voluntarily following him. However, due to his absolute confidence in his power, Augusta had quite generously allowed Linley to accompany him in departing. Augusta really is quite lucky. Linley is actually going alongside him. The other chief sovereigns, seeing this, were prepared to give up. But just as Linley and Augusta flew towards the teleportation array, a voice echoed within Linley's mind. Everyone, an extremely important matter is going on. All of you, hurry over. Linley, hearing this, couldn't help but turn and look towards the four chief sovereigns of the edicts. The speaker was the chief sovereign of death. Linley was puzzled. The four chief sovereigns of the edicts didn't chase after me, but instead stood there, discussing something. What, now they want us all to go over? What's going on? The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, frowned as he muttered something to himself. Then I'll have to wait for a bit before I can go to the divine light plane. Linley laughed calmly. Haha, I'll welcome you at any time. Come, the matters of the four excellencies are quite important. Augusta hurriedly laughed as well. And just like that, Linley and the group of people all turned and flew back. Rumble. The waves struck against the shoreline. The four chief sovereigns of the edicts were currently in the air above an island. How queer. Linley saw the four chief sovereigns of the edicts hovering above the island. His own divine sense clearly saw that aside from himself and the seven chief sovereigns who were flying over, no others were present. The divine wind plane has quite a few sovereigns. But, why did the chief sovereign of death only summon the 8 of us? Linley then instantly understood. 7 chief sovereigns. Linley, himself, was at the chief sovereign level of power. Everyone is here. The beautiful, red-haired maiden laughed as she looked at the 8 of them. Your Excellency. The 8, Linley included, all saluted. The 7 elemental chief sovereigns generally would refer to the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts as excellencies, in order to show respect. I still remember how, a trillion years after the universe was created, the various sovereigns were born as well. The 11 chief sovereigns were born, but of those 11 chief sovereigns, only 8 have survived. The beautiful red-haired maiden laughed calmly. Linley was secretly surprised. So, over the countless passage of years, even several chief sovereigns had fallen. Roughly a trillion years after the creation of the universe, there was once a battle between the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, and the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff. I trust quite a few people know the results. That time, Wadred was on a slightly lower level. The beautiful, red-haired maiden laughed. Back then, Lord Wadred and Lord Orloff had already reached the Paragon level. That battle was truly astonishing. The chief sovereign of lightning smiled. The beautiful, red-haired maiden nodded slightly. Although they have reached the Paragon level long ago, over the course of countless years, both of them have risen in power significantly. I trust all of you know very well that their power has risen. In addition, today, after countless years, they are going to once again engage in a duel. The chief sovereigns were all stunned. A duel. Linley was shocked as well. At the level of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, their duels were no longer just simple spars. If they weren't careful, they might be killed. This, Your Excellencies, you. The only woman amongst the 7 elemental chief sovereigns, the chief sovereign of water, stammered in surprise. It isn't a big deal to tell you. The black-robed chief sovereign of destruction said calmly. Orloff and I, aside from that competition long ago, also competed another time, after I acquired my Overgod artifact and he acquired that reward of will. This will be our 3rd competition. The reward of will. Linley was puzzled. The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, smiled. This is just a friendly competition. Let's go. We'll go to chaotic space. As he spoke, Orloff slashed his hand down. A wide, spacious spatial rift instantly appeared ahead of him. The 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts flew into it, and Linley and the rest of the 8 immediately followed and flew in as well. And then, the spatial rift vanished, completely healed. As the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, these 4 wouldn't compete casually. After all, everyone stood at the very peak. Once they fought, it was very possible that one side would fall and perish. They were all wary of each other, and so they didn't want to fight amongst each other. From this, one could imagine how rare it was for 2 of the chief sovereigns of the edicts to duel each other. The other chief sovereigns, including Augusta, all seemed quite eager to watch. Within the void, multicolored flows of chaotic energy streamed everywhere. 12 figures stood there within the void. Haha, Wadred, this time, You are the one who issued the challenge. You are so confident, eh? Don't lose again. The beautiful red-haired maiden laughed. Humph. The chief sovereign of destruction, covered in a black robe, immediately flew into the center of the void. The white-haired, white-robed elder, the chief sovereign of fate, chortled as he too flew into the void. As for the other 10, they stood far away, watching. Your Excellency, after having been rewarded with will that time, of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, Orloff should be the strongest, right? However, the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadrid, has an Overgod weapon. I wonder who won and who lost during their second duel. The long jade-haired chief sovereign of water asked the chief sovereign of death. Couldn't you understand what I was saying earlier? Naturally, it was Wadrid who lost. The chief sovereign of death chortled. The other chief sovereigns were somewhat in disbelief. If they didn't compete using Overgod artifacts, the chief sovereign of fate would be stronger. But if they did, the chief sovereign of fate only had a soul-protecting Overgod artifact. There was no way for him to increase his attack power. Why, then, did the chief sovereign of destruction lose the second round? As for why he lost? Humph, that old fellow, Orloff, how much of his terrifying power have you truly witnessed? The chief sovereign of death laughed calmly. The group of chief sovereigns fell silent. A reward of will. Linley couldn't help but say. Your Excellency, what exactly is a reward of will? You don't even know about this. The chief sovereign of death looked at Linley, puzzled. The other chief sovereigns looked at him as well. I truly don't know. Linley laughed helplessly. A smile appeared on the small, pretty face of the chief sovereign of death. Haha, you've trained for less than 10,000 years. It makes sense that you don't know. The reward of will that I spoke of, is the reward that the Overgods will bestow upon those who win 10 consecutive victories in the planar wars. 10 consecutive victories. Linley frowned. Right. Every trillion years, there will be planar wars. Each planar wars will have 5 competitions. The 11 planes, aside from the life realm, will all compete. Every trillion years, the 10 planes will only compete a single time. The results of the battle have 3 possibilities: victory, defeat, and draw. Linley nodded slightly. He had participated in a planar war before. He knew that victory and defeat was determined by the results within the 2 corridors above the Stellar River. According to the rules, if one's plane wins 10 consecutive planar wars, then the 7 sovereigns of that plane will all receive a reward from the Overgods. They will all be bestowed with an additional portion of will, comparable to fusing with an additional sovereign spark. The chief sovereign of death explained in detail. Linley couldn't help but feel startled. A portion of will. This reward was simply too extravagant. Linley. The nearby chief sovereign of life smiled and said, "Do you think it is easy to win 10 victories in a row?" No, Linley immediately understood. He had undergone a planar war. A planar war required one side to dominate 2 stellar corridors simultaneously in order for that round to be considered a victory for that side. If only one corridor was conquered, then it would simply be a draw. Last time, if it hadn't been for Linley and Magnus fighting, the Divine Darkness plane probably wouldn't have won. More than half of the planar wars end up in a draw. The chief sovereign of death snickered. Occasionally, a plane will win a round. However, a trillion years later, the next battle might be a draw, making the earlier win pointless. After all, only by winning 10 victories in a row would one be rewarded. Forget about 10 consecutive wins, even 5 consecutive wins is inconceivable. But even if you won 5 times in a row, if you reached a draw in the next round, or lost the next round, then you would have to start from scratch again. Linley nodded slightly. The various planes were all on par in power. Given the rules for victory in the planar wars, to win 10 rounds in a row, the chances of accomplishing it were so low as to be nearly zero. A trillion years each time. From the creation of the universe until now, there has been more than 1,000,000 planar wars. The chief sovereign of death sighed. More than 1,000,000, Linley's heart clenched. A trillion years each time. How long ago, then, had the universe been created? Linley felt astonished. Most likely, the chief sovereigns who had unlimited lifespan couldn't even be bothered to calculate it. It was simply too long. They would just say countless years. But Linley, do you know how many times, over the course of countless years, a side has won 10 rounds in a row? The chief sovereign of death smirked. This, I don't know. Linley couldn't be sure. Once. Just once. The chief sovereign of death sighed. Over countless years, there have been 6 cases where a side won 9 rounds in a row. But on the 10th round of those 6 cases, all of the other planes would join forces to prevent that other side from winning a 10th time. Linley understood. The sovereigns didn't wish for other sovereigns to receive the reward of will. Thus, even if one side won 9 battles in a row, for the 10th battle, the other planes would join forces. This sole success was achieved by the higher plane belonging to fate, the celestial realm. The chief sovereign of death sighed as she spoke. Precisely because of that, the 7 sovereigns of fate were all bestowed with an additional portion of will. Because of that, the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, is naturally more powerful than us. Linley sighed to himself. The chief sovereign of fate was a paragon to begin with. Now, he had gained an additional portion of will. No wonder he was so powerful. In addition, Orloff never gets involved in mortal affairs. He is completely absorbed in training. He researches the fundamental principles behind innate divine abilities, and the reasons why a body can become powerful, the chief sovereign of death sighed. For example, Orloff's body is definitely ranked as one of the top 3 amongst the sovereigns in terms of strength. Linley was secretly shocked. This chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, an old fellow who never cared about worldly matters, was such a terrifying figure. Watch. They are about to fight now. The chief sovereign of death suddenly said. Linley hurriedly looked over, and the other chief sovereigns also focused their attention, watching rapidly. Within the vast, chaotic void, the white-haired, white-robed chief sovereign of fate was quietly standing there, staring at his opponent, the chief sovereign of destruction. As for the chief sovereign of destruction, a heart-shaking black aura surrounded him. This black aura was so pure and so black that it devoured everything around it. Even the chaotic streams of energy were devoured by the black aura. Slowly, the reach of the black aura expanded until, moments later, it reached 1,000 kilometers. Orloff is very powerful. However, this time, Wadred has developed a supreme technique as well. The chief sovereign of death sent towards Linley. What sort of supreme technique? Linley was curious. The chief sovereign of death gave a meaningful glance at Linley, then sent, in the past. The 4 ancestors of your 4 divine beasts clan had a combined innate divine ability that was extremely powerful, so much so that it could threaten chief sovereigns. And now, Wadred has developed a supreme technique that is similar to that combined innate divine ability. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 18, Divine Beast, Sable Leviathan. What? The combined innate divine ability of the 4 ancestors. Linley's eyes turned round. And then, Linley stared towards the chief sovereign of destruction, who stood there in the void. He mused, 20,000 years ago, the chief sovereign of destruction has obtained half of the divine beast blood essence from Grandpa Beirut. Right. 5,000 years ago, Gislazen's group of 4 loaned to the chief sovereign of destruction 100 high gods of the 4 divine beasts clan. Most likely, that was also for the sake of analyzing the innate divine ability of the 4 divine beasts. And now, he has actually succeeded. Inconceivable. This chief sovereign of destruction is indeed a terrifying figure. An innate divine ability could never be perfectly learned, but there was hope for mimicking a similar divine ability. For example, someone like the chief sovereign of destruction, if he analyzed it enough and also utilized the blood essences of the four divine beasts, he would still have a chance at mimicking it. For example, Linley, the amethyst space of the amethyst god beasts was a very special supreme technique. Under the intentional guidance of the Redbud Sovereign, Linley finally understood the principles behind it. Although the power wasn't as great as when the amethyst god beasts themselves used the technique, the power was still tremendous. The 10 chief sovereign level experts fell silent, staring into the distance at the upcoming duel between the two mighty chief sovereigns of the edicts. Crackle! A black light spread out to 1,000 kilometers, and within the center of that black light, a blurry, sinister-looking figure continued to hover there quietly. Orloff. I borrowed from the innate power of a unique race that exists in the infernal realm, the Tartarians. After countless years, I've finally further perfected my supreme technique. This technique is now far more powerful than it was last time. This time, take another look at my most powerful attack. The chief sovereign of destruction's voice echoed in the void. Oh! From the sound of it, it should be excellent. Make your move. The white-robed, white-haired Orloff continued to simply smile. His black robe fluttering, the chief sovereign of destruction stared coldly at his opponent. His hand waved, and a pitch-black long spear emerged in his hand. The black long spear was nearly 2 meters long. Even though he hadn't attacked with it yet, the fierce aura that it naturally emanated was causing the surrounding streams of chaotic energy to crumble. Linley and the other distant spectators were all astonished. Everyone understood that the long spear was a destruction Overgod weapon. Rumble, the vast amounts of black light in the surrounding area suddenly contract, completely merging into the body of the chief sovereign of destruction. This caused a true void to appear within 1,000 kilometers, without any energy being left behind at all. Rustle. A strange sound was emitted from the mouth of the chief sovereign of destruction. At the same time, behind the chief sovereign of destruction, an enormous illusion appeared. The illusion was actually an awe-inspiring 10,000 kilometers in length. This was an enormous, coiling creature that was similar to a serpent. Its soft, coiling body was covered with black scales. In addition, it had more than 10,000 sharp claws. 10,000 kilometers, with 10,000 sharp claws, and more than 10,000 sharp wings. At first glance, the countless scales, claws, and wings seemed to be made out of black steel. This monster's head was completely bald. It had only a pair of eyes, with one eye having white pupils and one eye having red pupils. Linley, watching from afar, was completely stupefied. The true form of the chief sovereign of destruction was simply too frightening. What is this? Linley whispered. Linley's divine sense was constantly active. Because of his fused sovereign power, others weren't able to sense Linley's divine sense at all. However, Linley himself was able to clearly see that after the chief sovereign of destruction unleashed this technique, countless strands of spiritual energy were bizarrely swirling towards the chief sovereign of fate. The chief sovereign of fate was like prey that had been trapped. You didn't know. The chief sovereign of death glanced at Linley, then said, Wadred is the very first creature that was born in the infernal realm. He lives in the depths of the chaotic sea. He himself named himself the divine beast, Sable Leviathan. This innate divine ability is known as the soul cage. The chief sovereign of death, being the first creature of the netherworld, was of a similar age to the chief sovereign of destruction, who was the first creature of the infernal realm. Of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, the 2 of them were the oldest. The divine beast, Sable Leviathan. Innate divine ability, soul cage. Linley's heart trembled. Indeed, every single one of the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts were formidable. However, this sort of ability won't have much of an impact on the chief sovereign of fate. Watch, the chief sovereign of death laughed softly. Linley had already seen it. As the chief sovereign of destruction has unleashed his innate divine ability, Soul Cage, he also swept over with his destruction Overgod weapon at a speed so fast, it was akin to teleportation, as he charged at the chief sovereign of fate. Rumble. The black spear shadow instantly transformed into countless spear shadows, covering an area of 1,000 kilometers. They were like countless venomous vipers that spat outwards. Every single spear shadow spat out a ray of black light, and the countless spear shadows actually once more swirled around the chief sovereign of fate. And then, the countless spear shadows seemed to flood towards and deluge the chief sovereign of fate. Boom! All of the spear shadows vanished. A single sword shadow pierced straight towards the head of the white-robed elder, the chief sovereign of fate. His most powerful, supreme attack. Exterminatus. From start to finish, the white-robed elder, the chief sovereign of fate, simply faced it all with a smile. He didn't even fight back. His body was surrounded by countless rays of black light and was under extremely great compression. Heh. The chief sovereign of fate chuckled slightly, then stretched out his right now. Strangely, although his entire body was covered and compressed by rays of black light, when he lifted his right hand, he seemed to be moving in a very normal manner. With the flip of his hand, the surface of his entire palm became covered with a strange golden light. His palm rose from his side and simply slapped against the sides of the black long spear. With just a low, rumbling striking sound. Whoosh! The Overgod weapon was knocked flying back. How terrifying! Linley had been stunned by the chief sovereign of destruction's attack. Now, he was stunned by the chief sovereign of fate's simple yet strong deflection. Your Excellency, how is it that the chief sovereign of fate can use his hand to strike against an Overgod weapon? Linley couldn't believe what he had just seen. He couldn't help but speak mentally to the chief sovereign of death. The chief sovereign of death laughed softly. Orloff has an additional portion of will compared to the rest of us to begin with. Naturally, his foundation is superb. But that isn't the most terrifying thing. What's truly terrifying is that Orloff is a madman. Madman. Linley didn't understand. Right. Him and I have known each other for countless years, and I understand him very well. The chief sovereign of death sighed. He has no desire to fight or struggle against others, nor is he greedy, nor will he abuse the weak. In short, he can be described as a man with an extremely good temperament. If he's so good-natured, why is he a madman? Linley didn't understand. The chief sovereign of death sent with a laugh, Linley, you tell me. He already stands at the peak, but instead of enjoying the fruits that being at the peak brought to him, he only enjoys a single hobby. That hobby is, increasing his strength. Increasing his strength. Linley didn't understand. How? Research. The chief sovereign of death sighed. This old fellow became the chief sovereign of fate shortly after the universe was created, and became a paragon as well. From then onwards, he began to research various unique races, research various innate divine abilities and innate powers. He analyzed where these abilities came from, and then, he used many of them on himself in order to increase his own power through such methods. Linley, hearing this, was completely stupefied. He can research innate divine abilities. Linley felt speechless. Don't think it's strange. All races and creatures are formed from a soul and a body. Innate powers are generally linked to the blood and to the soul. This old fellow, over the course of countless years, has spent his time analyzing various souls in depth. The chief sovereign of death sighed. He is a madman. Do you know? His body's strength was originally quite ordinary, but through his research, he has made it so that his body's strength isn't any inferior to mine. Linley felt shock in his heart as he heard this. A person who has, for countless years, absorbed himself in research. Who never relaxes or slackens, and who never enjoys any form of entertainment, and who never fights with anyone. You tell me, if he isn't a madman, what is he? The chief sovereign of death asked. After listening to this, Linley couldn't help but turn to look at the distant white-robed, white-haired elder. He has neither a wife nor any kids. Linley asked. None. The chief sovereign of death shook her head. I told you. His only goal is to increase his strength. He, really is a madman. Linley couldn't help but say to himself. Even Linley himself would, at most, make his clones train hard. He would at least have his original body accompany his wife, his family, his friends. Although he, too, dreamed of reaching the peak, in his heart, his family and friends were equally important. But this chief sovereign of fate? He, probably views increasing his own power as a form of amusement. Linley mused to himself. This sort of stubborn, eccentric madman who had spent countless years doing nothing besides raising his own power, how terrifying must he now be? Thanks to Orloff's influence, quite a few sovereigns have begun to research and analyze some races with unique innate abilities. Only, how could doing this sort of research be easy? It requires both ability and patience. You might spend countless years, only for all of your efforts to result nothing. The chief sovereign of death sent mentally. The chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, is excellently patient. He has spent countless years deep within the chaotic sea. This time, he has come up with a truly supreme technique, and he wishes to truly defeat Orloff for once. A truly supreme technique. Linley understood that this should be the attack that was similar to the supreme technique of the four divine beasts. Not bad. The white-robed, white-haired chief sovereign of fate had the aura of a judge evaluating an entry. Wadred, this exterminatus technique of yours, by borrowing from the power of the Tartarians, this technique of yours is nearly 3 times more powerful in terms of attack power than it was last time. Very well done. All right, unleash the supreme technique you've developed. The white-robed elder truly did seem to be an eccentric madman who had seen something he liked. His blazing gaze was focused on the chief sovereign of destruction. The sinister, black-robed chief sovereign of destruction cracked his lips in a grin. Indeed, I still have to use that technique in order to be able to threaten you. With a flip of his hand, the long spear within the chief sovereign of destruction's hand vanished, and then a similar black long spear appeared. Only, this long spear was slightly longer. Sovereign weapon. Linley said, puzzled. Why had the chief sovereign of destruction put away his Overgod artifact and changed it to a sovereign artifact? Although he didn't understand, the chief sovereign of destruction and the chief sovereign of fate were making their moves against each other once again. The 10 chief sovereign level experts all focused their attention as they watched. Everyone knew that a terrifying scene was about to appear. Orloff. The chief sovereign of destruction said in a slightly smug voice, this technique of mine was developed after I spent nearly 20,000 years analyzing the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts. In addition, I was extremely lucky to suddenly have a flash of insight. If it hadn't been for that bit of luck, I probably would have spent countless years fruitlessly. But the power of this technique. The chief sovereign of destruction laughed as he looked at the distant chief sovereign of fate. You must be careful. Just come. The chief sovereign of fate's eyes were shining. The black-robed chief sovereign of destruction immediately raised his head and let out a thunderous roar, and around his body, 4 phantoms suddenly appeared. An azure dragon phantom, a black tortoise phantom that appeared akin to a dragon turtle, a vermilion bird phantom that appeared akin to a phoenix, and a white tiger phantom. The 4 phantoms were only roughly 2 or 3 meters long, but their bodies swirled around the chief sovereign. The vermilion bird phantom was above his head. The black tortoise phantom was beneath his feet. The azure dragon phantom was to his left. The white tiger phantom was to his right. Rumble. The surrounding space within 1,000 kilometers suddenly began to tremble. In this moment, within 1,000 kilometers, the flowing streams of energy in chaotic space suddenly, completely froze. The constantly fracturing and shattering spatial tiers also froze. This. Linley was shocked. Impossible. The faces of the chief sovereign of death and the others all changed. The 10 chief sovereign level experts all sensed that the surrounding area had been completely locked. The 10 of them were only affected by the remnant power, and yet all of them felt bound, making their movement speed lessen drastically. From this, one could imagine what sort of situation the chief sovereign of fate, who had suffered 99% of the power from this, was in. A translucent ray of light shot out at terrifying speed, diving into the chief sovereign of fate's body. The 4 divine beasts, all lesser sovereigns, were able to threaten chief sovereigns with this innate divine ability. How powerful, then, was the chief sovereign of destruction when he used this technique? Although it wasn't the complete, perfect 4 divine beasts fused innate ability, the power of this technique wasn't much weaker. However, the chief sovereign of destruction didn't relax at all. After releasing this technique, immediately afterwards, swoosh! The chief sovereign of destruction, wielding that black long spear, immediately charged towards the chief sovereign of fate, stabbing directly towards the white-robed chief sovereign of fate with his spear. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 19, Orloff's Invitation. Within the void, the white-robed chief sovereign of fate continued to stand there calmly. Whoosh! Whoosh! Around the torso, the legs, and the shoulders of the chief sovereign of fate, a hazy light swirled and constricted. It seemed like water that was boiling and bubbling around him. The hazy aura of light frothed atop the chief sovereign of fate, but the chief sovereign of fate's gaze was locked upon the spear that was stabbing towards him. The black spear came piercing over. In this moment, the chief sovereign of fate's gaze suddenly grew sharp. Whoosh! His right hand suddenly swept out, seemingly sweeping the heavens before him. Even the locked space around him began to tremble. Whap! The right hand of the chief sovereign of fate actually trapped the long black spear's spearhead. The chief sovereign of destruction was awestruck at this. And then, he let out a resigned sigh. I still lose. Wadred. The chief sovereign of fate's eyes were flashing with a strange light, and he hurriedly asked, what is the name of this technique you came up with? This was borrowed from the supreme technique of the 4 divine beasts. The name of it is space-time paradox. Space-time paradox? An extremely powerful attack. After all these years, I finally felt the aura of death stretch towards me. The chief sovereign of fate let out a sigh. The chief sovereign of destruction let out a forlorn chuckle. Enough, Orloff. I lost. This technique, space-time paradox, is definitely the most powerful attack I have ever developed. It increased my power at least 1,000-fold. And yet, this technique still is unable to overcome you. Haha, the chief sovereign of destruction's laugh contained some grief and resignation within it. Wadred. The chief sovereign of fate said solemnly, I can tell you clearly that this technique of yours was primarily focused on attacking the soul. But I have a soul-protecting Overgod artifact. Thus, this supreme attack of yours, space-time paradox, is ineffective against me. Aside from a soul attack component, your space-time paradox also impacts both space and time, but over the course of countless years, I have primarily focused my research on material aspects, such as body strengthening and material attacks. Despite that, I still had to use all my strength to be able to block your spear, despite that constrictive power. The chief sovereign of destruction let out a sigh. He understood as well. He immediately understood, as soon as he had developed space-time paradox. The other 2 chief sovereigns definitely were no match for him now. Given how space-time paradox clashed against the soul, someone who did not possess a soul-protecting Overgod artifact would definitely not be able to resist it. But unfortunately, the chief sovereign of fate just so happened to have one. The chief sovereign of fate had completed the Overgod mission and selected a soul-protecting Overgod artifact. Many felt that he was foolish, that his choice was useless. After all, how could other chief sovereigns possibly pose a threat to his soul? But who would have imagined that at this point, it proved effective? You should remember our agreement. The chief sovereign of fate's gaze was hot. The chief sovereign of destruction looked at him, then let out a bitter laugh. Naturally, I will honor it. The other 10 chief sovereign level individuals who were watching this battle from far away, upon seeing the conclusion, were stupefied. How can that be? Lord Orloff, even under that sort of constriction, he was still able to block such a quick attack. The chief sovereign of water couldn't believe it at all. Just now, the technique space-time paradox had exerted such a powerful constrictive force on the surrounding area that even the distant chief sovereigns felt it. Lord Orloff actually won. The chief sovereigns were truly stunned. Terrifying. Linley only said this single word to himself. The chief sovereign of life smiled. The combined attack of the 4 divine beasts had an impact on space and time, but it was still primarily a soul attack. Orloff has a soul-protecting Overgod artifact, and so when this technique was applied to him, all it was able to do was bind him. But despite being bound, he was still able to block that spear. How useless! The chief sovereign of death couldn't help but curse softly. Linley couldn't help but look towards the chief sovereign of death. He had never seen this adorable, beautiful maiden be so irritated. Linley. The chief sovereign of death suddenly sent mentally to Linley. What is it? Linley looked at the chief sovereign of death, puzzled. There is something which I hope you can promise me. The chief sovereign of death sent solemnly. Please speak. Linley said hurriedly, but in his heart, he still felt puzzled. The chief sovereign of death, ask him for something? The chief sovereign of death sent, remember this. No matter what, the 3 of you from Yulon, no matter what, are not to give the blood essence of the 4 divine beasts to Orloff. Linley was completely puzzled. Chief sovereign, can you tell me why? Ugh. The chief sovereign of death let out a sigh. Linley. Do you know why, just now, Wadred switched his Overgod weapon for a sovereign weapon? I truly don't. Linley had been puzzled earlier as to why the Overgod weapon had been swapped for a sovereign artifact. Didn't that mean he was lowering his own attack power? The chief sovereign of death sent mentally, actually, this time, after we 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts rendered our verdict upon you, all of you left. At that time, the chief sovereign of destruction, Wadred, suggested a competition with the chief sovereign of fate. However, the chief sovereign of fate didn't agree, because, the chief sovereign of fate disdains competitions. Afterwards, the chief sovereign of destruction mentioned the supreme technique that he had developed, based on the innate divine abilities of the 4 divine beasts. The chief sovereign of death sighed. At that time, we were all shocked. As for Orloff, that madman was intrigued. However, he could imagine the power of a supreme technique that was akin to the combined innate divine abilities of the 4 divine beasts. And so that madman Orloff didn't feel confident either. Thus, they made an agreement. What agreement? Linley asked hurriedly. The agreement was, once the chief sovereign of destruction was prepared to release his supreme technique, he was only permitted to use his sovereign weapon to attack. If the chief sovereign of fate was unable to raise his hand to block the sovereign weapon, that would be considered the chief sovereign of fate having lost. If the chief sovereign of fate was hit by the attack but still was able to block, then he would be considered the victor. The chief sovereign of death said. Linley understood as well. The chief sovereign of fate, by relying on his understanding of the laws and his own power, was able to use his hand to block an Overgod weapon. However, once he was struck by space-time paradox, the chief sovereign of fate's speed would drastically lessen. If he wasn't able to block the attack, then if the chief sovereign of destruction was using his Overgod weapon, the chief sovereign of fate would perish. Thus, when using that technique, the chief sovereign of destruction was not to use his Overgod weapon. The two were simply sparring, after all. The chief sovereign of death shook her head and sighed. But they added a bet to their competition. What bet? Linley said, puzzled. If the chief sovereign of destruction won, the chief sovereign of fate would have to explain the principles of his supreme technique to him. But if the chief sovereign of fate won, then the chief sovereign of destruction would also have to explain the principles of his supreme technique. The chief sovereign of death let out a sigh. But, Linley was rather stunned. At first, Wadred was unwilling to accept these stakes, but Orloff clearly wanted to know the principles of the supreme technique very much, and so he said that if Wadred didn't accept these stakes, he wouldn't agree to the duel. The chief sovereign of death sighed. It was Wadred who wanted to challenge Orloff, after all. In addition, he was very confident in himself, and so he agreed to the bet. Linley nodded slightly. Linley. I know, even if one understands all the principles of an attack akin to an innate divine ability, actually executing it, without the blood essence, the power would be much, much lower, even if the attack could be executed. The chief sovereign of death looked at Linley. Thus, Linley, the three of you in the Yulon branch are not to give Orloff the blood essence of the four divine beasts, no matter what. The chief sovereign of death spoke quite bluntly. I understand. I won't give him the blood essence of the four divine beasts. Linley nodded. Alas. Actually, by giving you these instructions, the chief sovereign of death stared far into the void, at the chief sovereigns of destruction and fate. Ever since he came up with that technique, the chief sovereign of destruction has surpassed me and Verwea. The balance of power between us four chief sovereigns of the edicts is gone. Linley nodded. The chief sovereign of fate had a protective Overgod artifact, but the chief sovereigns of death and life did not. Who could possibly resist the chief sovereign of destruction's space-time paradox attack? This, Linley couldn't help but look towards the chief sovereign of death. Wadred and Orloff are able to counter each other, they shouldn't go so berserk as to act against me and Verwea. The chief sovereign of death sent with a laugh. It is much like how we four chief sovereigns of the edicts wouldn't go act against the chief sovereigns of the laws. Since we are already at the peak, if we kill everyone else at our level, won't we feel lonely? The words of the chief sovereign of death were actually meant to comfort herself. They can research. Why can't you, chief sovereign? Linley said consolingly. I don't have the patience. The chief sovereign of death let out a soft laugh. If we are to actually fight though, so long as Verwea and I join forces, it's hard to say who will be the one to perish. At this moment, the chief sovereign of death and the chief sovereign of life exchanged a glance, as though discussing something. Within the void, the chief sovereign of destruction and the chief sovereign of fate were currently chatting through divine sense. Ha ha, how marvelous. The chief sovereign of fate's eyes were filled with strange colors. This space-time paradox of yours truly is extremely miraculous. Although the power is inferior to the combined innate divine ability of the four divine beasts, it just so happens to avoid the problem of the differences in the souls. Wadred, I truly admire you. The chief sovereign of destruction had an ugly look on his face. Unfortunately, this technique can only be unleashed when relying on the lineage of the four divine beasts. The chief sovereign of fate let out a sigh. After speaking, he couldn't help but turn to look at Linley, amongst the other 10 in the distance. The battle was over. The 12 chief sovereign level experts all departed from chaotic space and returned to the nearby divine wind plane. The cool, clear sea wind blew. There, above the sea, those 12 figures separated as well. Swish. Not far away, atop the sea, a metallic life form flew past. The deities within the metallic life form glanced towards the 12 in the distance. They didn't pay any attention. How could they have imagined that those 12 floating figures were 12 chief sovereign level experts? Orloff, last time, you said you were going all out. This time, you also said that you went all out. The beautiful, red-haired maiden looked at Orloff and let out a snort. Are you hiding part of your power? Orloff, that old fellow, let out a resigned chuckle. This time, I really did go all out. You have no idea, when Wadrid used that technique just now, I was badly frightened. That soul attack is so strong that if it wasn't for my soul-protecting Overgod artifact, I would truly have been finished. Even the distortion on space-time was enough to make it so that I could just barely deflect that spear. Humph, keep acting smug. The beautiful, red-haired maiden let out a snort. Linley and the others could only watch quietly. After all, the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts were on good terms with each other. It wouldn't be appropriate for others to interrupt. Linley, the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, suddenly turned to look towards Linley. Chuckling, he said, "Are you free? If you are, how about you come pay a visit to my Orloff Gardens in the Celestial Realm? What do you say?" The Orloff Gardens, in the Celestial Realm, was viewed as the most sacred of areas. This was a massive garden that floated extremely high in the air, and it was also the residence of the chief sovereign of fate. Even ordinary sovereigns, without Orloff's permission, wouldn't dare to enter the Orloff Gardens at all. Normally, the chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, spent all his time in the gardens in research. Linley, remember what you promised me. The chief sovereign of death sent to him. Not just her, even the chief sovereigns of destruction and life hurriedly looked towards Linley. As these 3 saw it, Orloff's defense could be described as unbreakable. If Orloff was to then learn the space-time paradox technique, who could be a match for him? Although they all knew that, given Orloff's nature, he wouldn't kill them, but, they still didn't want for Orloff's power to rise too much. Linley laughed awkwardly, then said helplessly, "Lord Orloff, I truly am sorry. I have something important to do first." "Haha, no rush, no rush. When you have time, you can come find me later." Orloff smiled. "All right, everyone. I'll go back now." The chief sovereign of fate, Orloff, chortled, then left on his own. Linley, the chief sovereign of light, Augusta, who had been silent this entire time, beamed as he looked towards Linley. He sent mentally, "Weren't you going to go to my divine light plane?" Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 20, Fight, Kill. The divine light plane? Right. Linley sent back and laughed. "Just now, when we were watching those 2 chief sovereigns battle, we had to delay that slightly. Let's head out now, then." Augusta smiled in such a friendly manner, as though he were about to invite his closest friend over. But between Linley and Augusta, there clearly existed multiple enmities. The first was that Linley's ancestors had been killed by Augusta. The second was Beirut and Augusta had enmity between them as well. The third was that when Linley was a high god, Augusta had threatened Linley to force him to hand over the 9 soul pearls, and had wanted to kill Linley. Fortunately, the chief sovereign of destruction had appeared. But right now, it seemed as though the 2 of them had forgotten all these things. "Haha, let's leave together." Linley chortled, and thus accompanied Augusta to fly back towards the distant Windflow Mountain. "Augusta!" A voice rang out. And a figure suddenly flew over, moving like a bolt of lightning. Linley turned to look. This person had long, golden yellow hair, with the seal of a lightning bolt on his forehead. It was the chief sovereign of lightning. The chief sovereign of lightning chortled, "Augusta, you are going back. What a coincidence. I just so happen to have an important affair in your divine light plane as well." "Oh." Augusta had a sudden thought, then smiled. "Linley is coming as well. Let's go together." Linley couldn't help but feel surprised, and he gave Augusta a glance as he mused. Augusta relies on his Overgod artifact for his power, but this chief sovereign of lightning has a sovereign clone. In terms of will alone, he is on a level higher than Augusta. In addition, he is of the lightning element, and so his speed is exceedingly quick. If he gets involved, can it be that Augusta feels confident in being able to deal with him? This chief sovereign of lightning, all smiles, followed Linley and Augusta towards Windflow Mountain. Halfway over, a voice suddenly rang out in Linley's mind. Linley, behind you, there are 5 other chief sovereigns who are following. There are 2 with you right now. It seems as though all 7 of these chief sovereigns are rather envious of your Overgod artifact. How about you come to my netherworld instead? The speaker was the chief sovereign of death. Linley couldn't help but chuckle. His divine sense surpassed that of all of the chief sovereigns, and so he had discovered those 5 behind him long ago. What shocked Linley was that the chief sovereign of wind, Dia, still dared to follow him as well. Thank you, chief sovereign. I'm completely able to deal with this matter by myself. Linley sent back. Oh. It seems you are quite confident in yourself. Since you say that, be careful that in the future, you won't even have the chance to feel regret. The chief sovereign of death sent, and then no longer paid attention to Linley. She quickly used Windflow Mountain's teleportation array and left the divine wind plane, returning to the netherworld. Linley chuckled. In terms of power, who did he fear? Of the 11 chief sovereigns, the only one who caused Linley to feel dread was the chief sovereign of destruction. Once I use my fused sovereign power, my strength will increase 100-fold. The chief sovereigns of the laws are not worthy of concern. Even the chief sovereigns of the edicts, the chief sovereigns of death and life wouldn't necessarily be able to catch up to me when I'm flying. As for the chief sovereign of fate, the reason he can resist space-time paradox is because of his soul-protecting Overgod artifact. It isn't that he himself is particularly powerful. In terms of power, he isn't that much stronger than the other chief sovereigns. After all, he doesn't have an Overgod weapon. Against him, I still feel confident in being able to stay alive. Only, the chief sovereign of destruction. The supreme technique of the chief sovereign of destruction, space-time paradox, was simply too terrifying. When that technique was unleashed, the power of his soul attack was 1,000-fold greater. The other chief sovereigns, in the face of that attack, would definitely perish. Only the chief sovereign of fate could resist it. However, no need to worry about him. Linley was very confident. First of all, in the eyes of the chief sovereign of destruction. He most likely only views the chief sovereign of fate as being a match for him. Secondly, once I completely fuse the 4 types of profound mysteries from 4 laws, my power, even the chief sovereign of destruction won't be able to do anything to me. Linley was very confident. His soul was extremely powerful to begin with. If he then fused 4 profound mysteries from different laws, why would he need to fear space-time paradox? Actually, Linley's potential was greater than just this, because Linley didn't want to go kill the other sovereigns. Even if Linley didn't make a breakthrough in the laws, if Linley were to fuse with a fire-type lesser sovereign spark, then his power would increase 100-fold. Linley, at one leap, would rise to a level of power that was capable of threatening the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts. Only, if others didn't make trouble for him, Linley didn't want to go kill the other sovereigns for no reason either. This was because, by relying on his own training, he would still have the ability to surpass all of the chief sovereigns. Windflow Mountain. Linley, the chief sovereign of light, the chief sovereign of lightning, and 3 other chief sovereigns were standing besides the teleportation array. Divine Light Plane. The chief sovereign of light produced a sovereign's medallion. Sovereigns generally wouldn't reveal their true identities, even when using teleportation arrays. A blurry light arose as the teleportation array was activated. In the moment of activation, a smile appeared on Linley's face. Smiles also appeared on the faces of Augusta and the others. Whoosh! Just a few moments after Linley's group of 3 departed, 5 figures descended from the skies. It was the other 5 chief sovereigns. Humph! That Augusta and Hurley who are they are stronger than the rest of us 5. I imagine all of us have the same idea today. On this trip, if the 5 of us move separately, most likely, none of us will have a chance to acquire the Overgod artifact. The chief sovereign of Wind, Dia, glanced towards the other 4. Thus, it's best if we join forces. Once the opportunity comes, we will rely on our own power to acquire the Overgod artifact. The other chief sovereigns all nodded in agreement. They all understood what the others were thinking. If after acquiring the Overgod artifact, Linley was able to rise in power to the level of the chief sovereign of light, most likely the other chief sovereigns wouldn't dare to have these sorts of thoughts. But Linley, after possessing the Overgod artifact, was only comparable to the chief sovereign of Wind. Naturally, nobody would fear him. The chief sovereign of Wind was one of the weakest of the rest of the 7 elemental chief sovereigns. The divine light plane. The other 5 chief sovereigns also entered the teleportation array, and the chief sovereign of Wind spoke out calmly while revealing his sovereign medallion. Yes, milord. The soldiers hurriedly once more activated it. In the blink of an eye, the 5 chief sovereigns were teleported away. The soldiers at the peak of Windflow Mountain were puzzled. How bizarre. The 2 groups of people that came back to back all had sovereign medallions. It seems that most of them are sovereigns' emissaries. Why have so many major figures gone to the divine light plane? For so many sovereigns' emissaries to go there, there must be a treasure of some sort. The bored soldiers began to casually chat about this matter. How could they have known that the 8 people who had just passed were all at the chief sovereign level? Linley's group of 3 emerged from an island, then flew away from it. Linley, where are you going to go? Augusta laughed in a very friendly manner. Me? Haha, to be honest, this is my first time coming to this divine light plane. However, my divine sense has already located the person I am looking for in the south. Linley laughed as he pointed towards the south. However, this friend of mine is an angel. Angel? Augusta was startled. Right. Thus, I would like to ask you, Augusta, to help out. I hope that you can permit my friend to regain freedom and free will. Linley laughed. Angels are all born from the angelic resurrection pool. To have them regain freedom? Hard, hard. Hard. Augusta frowned, saying the hard word 3 times in a row. Very hard. Linley laughed and asked. What's so hard about it? I know a simple method. The nearby chief sovereign of lightning laughed clearly. What method? Linley turned to look. The chief sovereign of lightning laughed loudly. The angelic resurrection pool is connected to the souls of the sovereigns. As long as you kill the sovereign, the angels that are controlled by the angelic resurrection pool will naturally regain their freedom. Hurley. Augusta frowned, looking at him. In an icy voice, he said, Why have you come to my divine light plane? How could Augusta not understand what the chief sovereign of lightning, Hurley, was thinking? Even if he was an idiot, he would know that it was for the Overgod artifact. The chief sovereign of lightning raised an eyebrow, then laughed. I'm here to search for a friend as well. Although he isn't an angel, he just so happens to be in the south as well. He even pointed while speaking. Augusta laughed coldly in his heart. Searching for a friend? Neither Linley nor Hurley were here to simply search for a friend. Hurley. Linley turned to look and said with intentional surprise, Did you just say that if I want an angel to regain freedom, all I have to do is kill the angel's sovereign? Right. Hurley laughed intentionally as well. But the chief sovereign of light has 7 sovereigns. Given your power, Linley, it wouldn't be hard to kill the other 6. However, the toughest one will be the one in front of you, Augusta. He is very powerful, even more powerful than the Dia that you battled. Augusta began to feel that the atmosphere was turning dark. What's going on today? Aside from the two of you who have come to search for friends, the other 5 chief sovereigns have come as well. Can it be that they are searching for friends as well? Augusta said with a smirk. Linley turned to glance backwards. The other 5 chief sovereigns. Linley didn't care about them at all. Augusta. Linley looked towards Augusta, then laughed helplessly. For the sake of my friend, then. You'll have to die. Linley's voice rang out, and as it did, a jade-green longsword appeared in his hand. It was the Life Overgod sword. Wielding the Life Overgod sword in his hand, Linley, not hesitating at all, stabbed straight towards the chief sovereign of light, Augusta, who was next to him. The blow was aimed for the head. The inky green fused sovereign power instantly activated. Rumble. In the instant the fused sovereign power filled the Life Overgod sword, the world seemed to shatter. Augusta, who had been completely confident when the sword appeared, suddenly had a changed look on his face. He hurriedly pulled out a sword of light as well, and he slashed out in a mysterious arc as he blocked the sword attack. Bang! It was as though countless mountains were crashing down upon him. Crack! Augusta, who had been caught somewhat off guard to begin with, actually had his sword of light be smashed backwards and land against his own body. His own body began to bleed from the impact, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood. Whoosh! The surrounding space within 1,000 kilometers had completely collapsed, as a terrifying large hole had appeared. Augusta himself was smashed straight into chaotic space. Rumble, because of that terrifying sword blow, the space within 1,000 kilometers had completely collapsed, while within 100,000 kilometers, because of the spatial ripples that had been created, every single living creature died. Even some of the closer islands were completely reduced to dust, leaving behind nothing whatsoever. Right as Linley had struck out against Augusta. This is the moment. The chief sovereign of lightning, Hurley, was fairly close to Linley. He simultaneously struck against Linley. He thrust out with a spear. The spear was crackling with a large amount of lightning, and it shot directly out from the chief sovereign of lightning's hands. This shooting motion was all but perfect, and as the spear slashed through the skies, it pierced directly towards Linley's forehead. Crackle, just a hint of a ripple spread out through the surrounding area. Clearly, the power of this attack was focused to an utmost degree. Linley had heavily injured Augusta with one blow, and he immediately turned to stare at Hurley. Seeing that the spear was shooting towards his forehead, and had almost arrived, Linley couldn't help but frown. He let out a growl. You are asking for death. Linley's voice seemed to thunder outwards and fill the skies. In the same instant, Linley launched a casual backhanded blow with his sword. Whap! The Life Overgod sword, infused with his fused sovereign power, slammed directly against that spear. Bang! The spear was instantly shattered into countless shards which shot everywhere. Not good. The chief sovereign of lightning, Hurley, instantly had a changed look on his face. This isn't right. Linley's power isn't right. If he is comparable to Dia when he uses his Overgod weapon, how could he shatter my sovereign weapon? How could he have easily wounded Augusta? He was hiding his power. Hurley now knew that something was off. But, it was too late. How fast did the Overgod weapon move? Ah! The chief sovereign of lightning let out a furious howl. His body suddenly separated into two and fled frantically towards two directions. Bang! Linley's Life Overgod sword chopped out, and a clearly visible inky jade sword light slashed through one of the bodies. That body instantly transformed into dust, leaving behind only a jewel that emanated an earthen yellow aura. Count yourself lucky. Linley glanced at the chief sovereign of lightning, Hurley, who had already fled far away. With a wave of the hand, he retrieved the Earth-type Lesser Sovereign Spark. Clearly, the one he had just killed was Hurley's Earth Sovereign clone. The Chief Sovereign of Lightning, Hurley, fled extremely quickly. After having lost his Earth Sovereign clone, he didn't even dare to turn back and look. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 21, Outside of One's Expectations. Augusta, you still want to flee? Linley retrieved the Sovereign Spark, then swept the 5 oncoming Chief Sovereigns with an icy gaze before charging directly into that spatial hole, formed by the collapse of the surrounding space, chasing after Augusta. That savage spatial hole devoured all the surrounding seawater while constantly shrinking. Off in the distance, the Chief Sovereign of Wind, Dia, and the others all stared with terror in their eyes. That's Linley. A black-robed man said, stunned. He shattered a sovereign artifact with one blow. Too terrifying. Hurley is the Chief Sovereign of Lightning, and he also has an Earth Sovereign clone. But just now, if he was just slightly slower, he would have lost his life. The Chief Sovereign of Water's handsome face was now ashen as well. These Chief Sovereigns all felt fear. If they had truly gone to fight with Linley for his Overgod artifact, most likely. It would be hard to say if any of the 5 would survive. Dia, you dared to lie to us. The other 4 Chief Sovereigns couldn't help but stare at the Chief Sovereign of Wind. Dia's eyes were filled with shock as well. He immediately said, everyone, have you gone muddle-headed from terror? When Linley fought with me, the power he revealed was comparable to mine. If he was this powerful back then, would I still be alive? Clearly, before this, Linley was hiding his true power. The other 4 Chief Sovereigns, upon hearing this, laughed bitterly. That sword blow of Linley's truly had scared them out of their wits. Even the Chief Sovereign of Lightning wasn't able to block a single sword from Linley. How could the Chief Sovereign of Wind, Dia, have done so? This wasn't Dia's fault. If they had to blame anyone, they could only blame Linley for hiding his power. Whoosh! The sea wind continued to howl drearily. There were no living creatures within 100,000 kilometers. The short battle between those 3 Chief Sovereign level experts had reduced the area to a wasteland. The Chief Sovereign of Lightning, Hurley, had fled the Divine Light Plane long ago. As for Dia and the rest of the 5, upon seeing the barren lands left behind by this battle, they felt as though boulders were resting against their hearts. Linley had suddenly revealed such terrifying power, he was so powerful as to make them panic. In this moment, they only had a single thought in their minds. How could Linley be this powerful? Within the void of chaotic space, multicolored streams of chaotic energy flew about randomly. How could Linley be this powerful? It wasn't just the 5 Chief Sovereigns who were thinking this, it was also the Chief Sovereign of Light, Augusta. Just now, I was caught off guard and wasn't able to unleash all my power. But, he still shouldn't be this strong. Augusta was completely terrified by Linley's sword. It had been like mountains crashing against him, causing him to instantly suffer a heavy wound. Augusta couldn't help but glance at Linley, who was behind him. His long brown hair fluttering, Linley was currently staring coldly towards the distant Augusta, his gaze as sharp as a blade. He was wielding the Life Overgod sword in his hand, and was currently charging towards Augusta at astonishing speed. Linley was like one of the titans who had been born after the creation of the universe. At this moment, he seemed completely unstoppable. After victory in this battle, I won't have any more regrets in my life. Linley's desire for battle was at an all-time high. Since the days when he was a youth at Wushan Mountain, he had grown up, advancing step by step until today, he stood at the peak of sovereigns. On this journey, his greatest regret was that he wasn't able to bring Grandpa Douring back to life. Clearly, bringing back Grandpa Douring was a dream that could never be realized. Linley now had only one goal: to kill Augusta and bring his mother her freedom. This was also for the sake of Grandpa Beirut and the 4 Divine Beasts clan. Augusta, must die. Linley's battle intent surged, and the inky jade sovereign power within his body boiled. Boom! Like a bolt of light, he instantly passed through the flows of chaotic energy and charged straight towards Augusta. Augusta's fleeing speed was also exceptionally fast. He turned to look and saw that Linley's gaze was filled with a killing intent. He couldn't help but feel shocked, and he hurriedly sent mentally, "Linley, your power is already greater than mine. If there are any problems, we can talk it out. Why must we fight to the death?" Linley just remained silent, continuing to chase at full speed. "Linley," Augusta was going to say something, but Linley's speed made it so that he had already arrived next to Augusta. Humph! Linley swept out with the life Overgod sword in his hand, and it shot out like a blazing, fiery comet towards Augusta, carrying that same world-annihilating aura that had terrified Augusta previously. Augusta no longer had a chance to speak, letting out a deep growl. The sword of light in his hand sliced out in a marvelous arc, slamming against Linley's life Overgod sword. Clang! A low, rumbling sound. The chaotic space around them shattered, and countless spatial rifts appeared. Augusta was knocked flying backwards like a sandbag, and he spewed blood from his mouth. Laws of the Earth, World Disintegrator. Eh? He didn't die. Linley frowned. World Disintegrator was Linley's most powerful attack of the laws of the Earth. In terms of power, it was already comparable to the sword intent supreme fuse technique which Linley had come up with. Logically speaking, after I used fused sovereign power, my strength increased 100-fold. He shouldn't have been able to block. Linley was a bit surprised by Augusta's strength, and then he let out a calm laugh. Humph! He was able to suppress the other 6 chief sovereigns in strength. This Augusta really is quite formidable. As he thought this, Linley charged towards Augusta once again. Within the empty void, only the two of them were present. Humph! Augusta wiped away the blood from the corner of his lips, then turned to look at the charging Linley. Gritting his teeth, he sent, "Linley, speak. What will you need in order to end this battle between us? What do you need me to agree to? Speak." "Oh." Linley gave Augusta a glance, then said calmly, "You want me to give you my conditions. My conditions are simple. You only need to permit me to kill your chief sovereign clone. As for your divine clones, I can spare them." Linley stared at Augusta in a weighing manner, awaiting his response. As he expected, Augusta's face sank. "Linley, I sincerely wish to negotiate with you, but for you to speak in such a manner." As soon as his words fell, Augusta transformed into a ray of light, and the fate Overgod sword in his hands, the lightsaber, pierced towards Linley's head at an astonishing speed. Crackle! Where the sword of light passed, countless tiny fractures appeared in the surrounding area. How fast? Linley was greatly shocked. Linley delivered a backhanded blow with his sword, World Imploder. Linley only sensed an extremely powerful force come through the life Overgod sword in his hands. That clashing power was so strong that Linley felt his hand go slightly numb. The clashing power was transmitted throughout his body, causing his entire body to tremble, and he couldn't help but feel a mouthful of blood surge through his throat. Ugh! Linley was sent flying, and spat out a mouthful of blood. How can that be? His attack power suddenly increased this much. Linley was completely stupefied. Swoosh! The cold-faced Augusta launched another stabbing blow towards Linley. Linley had no time to be stunned. The inky green sovereign power in his body surged, and his body drifted towards the left, instantly moving 1,000 kilometers away. Only then did Linley catch his bearings. Linley stared at the distant Augusta. He said in a low voice, "Augusta, it seems, I feel as though I am just getting to know you." Augusta was wielding that lightsaber in his hand, and his eyes were filled with a killing intent. He let out a low laugh. "Just getting to know me? Likewise. I'm just getting to know you as well. You, who only fought to a standstill with Dia, are actually almost 100 times as strong as Dia. A lesser sovereign who is this powerful. Augusta, the other chief sovereigns all believe that your only advantage over them is that you have an Overgod weapon, and one which isn't completely compatible with you. At most, your strength would increase tenfold. But, from the looks of it, you are far more powerful than them. Linley stared appraisingly at Augusta. Only now did Linley understand that, without question, Augusta was the number one figure amongst the 7 elemental chief sovereigns. In the past, Linley had thought that Augusta was on par with the chief sovereign of lightning, but now, it seemed, the difference was vast. So there really was a reason why he could behave so boldly for so many years. Linley mused to himself. Augusta, forget about sovereigns. Even many commanders viewed him as a tyrannical, arrogant, barbarous sovereign. Augusta cared deeply about his face, and he also had many women. One could imagine how many he had, just from looking at how many children he had. And then, one could consider how dominating and tyrannical his radiant churches were in the material planes. After all, the teachings of the church were set by Augusta himself. For such a person to have the position of chief sovereign of light without being able to be budged at all over the course of countless years, and to even be able to complete an Overgod mission and acquire an Overgod artifact, naturally, Augusta had some true ability to rely on. Over the course of countless years, aside from that time I faced the 4 divine beasts, when I was forced to reveal some of my true power, there has never been anyone who could force me to go all out. The chief sovereign of light, Augusta, wielded his lightsaber as he laughed towards Linley. Your power is excellent, and your potential is great. Compared to me, however, there is still a bit of a difference. Linley was now rather stunned. Right. In the past, we were all puzzled as to how Augusta could have resisted the combined supreme attack of the 4 ancestors. So indeed, Augusta's true power was even higher than I had expected. Today, either you perish or I die. Linley said coldly. Haha, it seems as though one of us must fall. Augusta gripped his lightsaber, his murderous intent skyrocketing. Linley gripped his life Overgod sword, staring back at him coldly. There, in the void, 2 mighty sovereigns stood there opposite one another, within the middle of chaotic streams of energy. Crackle, extremely minute, dense, bone-crackling sounds emitted from Linley's body. An astonishing, rapid transformation began to overtake Linley's body as those inky jade draconic scales instantly covered him, and atop the draconic scales were those muscles that were virtually undetectable by the naked eye. The savage inky jade spikes jutted out from Linley's forehead, elbows, knees, and spine. A draconic tail quickly emerged from behind, and even oscillated a few times. Augusta, seeing this, couldn't help but frown slightly. I have a feeling. Linley stared coldly with his dark, golden eyes at his opponent. Augusta, today, it will be you who dies. As soon as his words fell, Linley, the life Overgod sword in his hand, seemed to teleport. He instantly passed through the tens of kilometers of distance between them, and the jade-green life Overgod sword shot out like a divine emerald dragon, attempting to devour Augusta. Countless rays of inky jade sword light shot out like countless venomous vipers, swirling around and snapping towards Augusta. A translucent sword shadow was mixed in as well as it shot towards Augusta. Linley's supreme attack, with the fused laws, sword intent. The space of the void was completely shattered by the inky jade sword energy, shattered like glass into countless tiny pieces. He should die now. Linley stared at his opponent. Suddenly, within the inky jade sword energy, a ray of white light rose towards the heavens. He actually didn't die. Linley was secretly startled. This technique of his was infused with both a material attack and a soul attack component. Still, it made sense. Since Augusta was able to withstand even the combined supreme technique of the 4 divine beasts, his soul defense was clearly very powerful. Since you didn't die, let me give you another one. The inky jade light vanished, and Augustus' body was revealed. Augustus' body was currently covered with blood, and his clothes, formed from energy, were completely tattered. Clearly, in that earlier situation, he wasn't even able to keep his clothes stable. Immediately afterwards, however, a white light swirled over his body, and his bloody wounds all vanished, with his clothes being restored as well. What a terrifying attack! It even contained a soul attack component. Augusta was just about to pause to recover. But when he spread out his divine sense, he suddenly discovered that terrifying, savage, fiend-like inky jade figure had already arrived in front of him, and a jade-green sword was piercing straight for his head. Sword energy shot out dominatingly. Not good. Augusta waved his hand, sending his lightsaber forward to pierce directly against the tip of that life Overgod sword. But right at that moment, swish! Striking like a hammer, the sharp tip of Linley's draconic tail, flashing with that golden light, slashed out in an arc from behind, stabbing directly towards Augustus' head. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 22, Trump Card. Linley had acquired the blood essences of the 4 divine beasts. Although he hadn't been able to develop the fused supreme innate divine ability of the 4 ancestors, he had used part of the blood essence of the Azure Dragon to further strengthen his body. Linley discovered that his body was clearly too powerful. Even after he used a portion of the blood essence of the Azure Dragon, his body had reached a certain limit, beyond which it didn't strengthen significantly more. His body was no weaker than a sovereign artifact, and the tip of his draconic tail was in fact superior. And thus stab with the tail that contained the laws of the earth was something which sovereign artifacts definitely could not withstand. Terrible. Augustus' face changed. He needed to use his Overgod weapon to block Linley's Overgod weapon, and so, in that instant, his only reaction was to cover up with his arm. Augustus' arm swung up like a soft whip in a very simple, snapping motion. Whap! His arm snapped out extremely fast, and in the last moment, Augusta actually managed to strike against the side of the tip of Linley's draconic tail with the palm of his hands. But under Linley's control, the draconic tail twisted and pierced towards Augustus' palm. Bang! A white, armor-like membrane layer covered Augustus' palm. Clearly, it was his defensive sovereign artifact. But the stabbing pierce from Linley's full-strength draconic tail attack caused blood to spew out as the sharp draconic tail pierced through Augustus' palm. Whoosh! Augustus' body suddenly flashed backwards as he dodged aside, moving tens of kilometers away. That palm of his! Linley was shocked. Augustus' physical strength is actually this powerful as well. After his draconic tail had pierced through the defensive sovereign artifact, Linley had been planning to pierce through the palm and continue to drill through Augustus' head. But who could have imagined that Augustus' palm was also exceedingly tough? After boring through the defensive sovereign artifact and the palm, the power of Linley's draconic tail tip had already been spent. Augusta, I knew that your soul is powerful, but for your body to also be so powerful? Admirable. Linley's voice echoed in Augusta's mind, and then, not hesitating at all, Linley charged straight towards Augusta again. Linley, the two of us should end it here. Augusta fled away, flying at high speed. Now that Augusta was going all out, he was clearly moving a good deal faster than before. Even Linley wasn't able to catch up to him right away. I'm actually not able to catch up to him, even in dragon form. Linley was startled. Augustus' true power was more than 10 times greater than Linley had anticipated. This made it so that Linley and Augusta were roughly on par in power. Even though Linley was in dragon form, since Augusta trained in the laws of light, he specialized in speed. When going all out, even Linley wasn't able to catch him for the time being. Wait. Linley's powerful divine sense could clearly sense exactly how fast Augusta was moving. At present, The distance between himself and Augusta was continuing to slowly shrink. Although our speeds are comparable, they aren't identical. Rather, I'm very slightly faster than him. This difference in speed was quite minute. If one didn't pay extremely close attention, one wouldn't notice it at all. But the distance between Linley and Augusta was steadily shrinking. Sooner or later, Linley would catch up. "Linley, why must you insist on fighting with me to the death?" Augusta sent hurriedly. "I did kill the 4 divine beasts, but you came countless generations after them. I imagine that you've never even seen them, nor do you feel close to them. Why must you do this? In addition, the reason that Beirut and I have enmity for each other is because Beirut stole my 4 sovereign sparks. He was the one who acted against me. I can now promise to forget about the grudge between myself and Beirut. What do you say? If you have any additional requests, we can discuss them as well with sincerity." Linley just laughed coldly. "Just now, you wanted to kill me, but after I dragon formed and you discovered that you cannot kill me, you want to negotiate." Linley didn't pay him any heed. "Linley, do you insist on doing this?" Augusta was growing angry. "If push comes to shove, I'll charge into the infernal realm and annihilate your 4 divine beasts clan. I imagine that I'll have more than enough time to charge in and do just that." Although the two were only a few dozen kilometers apart, which was quite close for sovereigns, the difference in speed between the two was simply too small. Linley still needed multiple minutes to catch up to Augusta. The 4 divine beasts clan? Augusta, the infernal realm has the chief sovereign of destruction. I imagine that you know that the chief sovereign of destruction has a special relationship with Beirut and myself, and in the past, he's borrowed blood essences of the 4 divine beasts from us. In addition, he's also borrowed members of my 4 divine beasts clan. As long as I speak to him with divine sense, I trust that he will definitely stop you." Linley sent back. Augusta had almost gone insane from Linley's pursuit. The distance between himself and Linley was continuing to shrink, but there was nothing he could do. "Linley, your power isn't that much stronger than mine. The only advantage you have is that your dragon-formed body is comparable to a sovereign artifact and can be used as a sovereign weapon. But if I go all out, it's hard to say who will live and who will die." Augusta sent back. "Are you truly willing to fight in such a manner?" After their recent clash, Linley knew this as well. He wasn't that much stronger than his foe. In a life and death battle like this, it would indeed be hard to say who would win and who would lose. However, in terms of chances, Linley should have an 80% chance while Augusta only had a 20% chance. "I'm willing," Linley said calmly. "Fine, you madman." Augusta's face turned savage. "Then don't blame me for this." As he spoke, Augusta suddenly changed directions, flying towards another region at high speed. Linley's face changed. Augusta was now fleeing towards the direction of the celestial realm. Although the two were only 10 or so kilometers apart from each other now, the amount of time necessary for Linley to catch up was more than enough for Augusta to reach the celestial realm. Linley couldn't help but feel puzzled as to why Augusta was fleeing towards the celestial realm. According to the stories, the divine darkness plane is aligned with the infernal realm, while the divine light plane is aligned with the celestial realm. Can it be that Augusta is going to beg the chief sovereign of fate for help? Linley couldn't help but guess at this possibility. It was normal for chief sovereigns to have relationships with other chief sovereigns. "What, you are going to find the chief sovereign of fate?" Linley sent. While fleeing, Augusta said threateningly, "Right, I'm going to find Lord Orloff. Lord Orloff owes me a favor. Although he never gets involved in worldly affairs, if I call in that favor and have him kill you, that won't be a problem at all. This trump card, I've never been willing to actually use it. Don't force me to do so." Linley hesitated. Is Augusta telling the truth or not? Linley mused to himself. If it was true, given the power of the chief sovereign of fate, for him to kill Linley definitely wouldn't be a problem. Linley wouldn't be able to fight back. A favor? Why would Lord Orloff owe you a favor? Linley snickered. Linley, don't doubt it. You can go ask the chief sovereign of destruction or anyone else about this favor which Lord Orloff owes me. They all know about it. Go ahead and ask, and you'll know if I'm lying or not. Augusta wasn't actually willing to use up his trump card in such a manner either. The chief sovereign of fate wouldn't casually beg someone for help. A favor from him, in exchanging for having helped him with something, that could be used to save one's life. If the favor was used up, it would be gone. Unless Augusta was truly at the verge of death, how could he be willing to use it? Linley pondered rapidly, then let out a cold laugh. Oh, Lord Orloff owes you a favor? Fine. For Lord Orloff's sake, I'll let this matter come to an end. But I warn you, in the future, don't make trouble for members of my Four Divine Beasts clan. Otherwise, even at the cost of my life, I will kill you. After speaking, Linley turned and flew towards the infernal realm. Whew! Only now did Augusta let out a sigh of relief. Augusta watched as Linley flew towards the distant infernal realm, and he couldn't help but curse softly. How did this Linley suddenly grow so powerful? Fortunately, his speed is roughly equal to mine. If I want to be able to get rid of Linley, I either have to train to the Paragon level, or use the second method. The second method was naturally to go ask Orloff to dispose of Linley. However, there's no need for me to fear Linley either. Augusta stared into the distance and let out a calm laugh. Linley is a paragon. He has already maximized his potential, whereas I have only fused 5 profound mysteries, and am just a step away from becoming a paragon. When, one day, I too become a paragon, I will be able to easily deal with him. This time, when I go back, I need to calm my mind and focus on my training. And so, Augusta turned and flew towards the divine light plane. The 4 higher planes were all neighbors, while the 7 divine planes were close by as well. These 11 planes were located in the same area, and in their center was the planar battlefield. I didn't expect that Augusta would actually be so powerful. While flying through the void, Linley frowned pensively. If Augusta had been just slightly weaker, Linley would have killed him long ago. But Augusta's power was almost on par with his own. Once Augusta fled to the chief sovereign of fate, then there would be no hope. Linley couldn't afford to die. If he died, Beirut and Bluefire would be in trouble as well. The Yulon branch would probably be forever suppressed by Augusta, never to rise again. Thus, Linley chose to temporarily retreat. The chief sovereign of fate owes him a favor? Humph. I'll let Augusta live a bit longer for now, then. Linley mused to himself. I will go back and focus on fusing the laws. If I become a paragon, then even Orloff will be no match for me, much less Augusta. Linley had already reached the borders of the infernal realm. With a wave of the hand, he tore open a spatial rift. And so, Linley re-entered the infernal realm. In terms of fusing the different laws, Linley had currently only fused 3 of them. It must be understood that with each increase in the number of different laws, the power of the fusion would increase 100-fold. In addition, based on what Linley believed, once he fused all 4 of the laws, the heavens would probably bestow him with another portion of will. By then, who would Linley have to fear? The infernal realm. The air above the Blood Ridge continent. Linley's figure was soaring through the skies. Compared to Linley, the nearby metallic lifeforms seemed to be slow, crawling ants. They were on completely different levels of speed. Whoosh! His divine sense covered the entire Blood Ridge continent. Linley instantly discovered Beirut, located within the Skirite Mountains. This was Beirut's divine clone. Grandpa Beirut. Linley sent. Beirut's divine clone always remained within the Indigo Prefecture of the Blood Ridge continent. Indigo Prefecture. The Skirite Mountains. Beirut was temporarily living within the estate that had been built for Linley. Beirut raised his head, only to a figure descending from the skies, moving towards him at a speed comparable to teleportation. It was Linley. Linley. Beirut was overjoyed. How did it go? Did you kill Augusta? Beirut's eyes were filled with hope. Upon seeing the look on Beirut's face, Linley couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I failed. Linley shook his head and sighed. How? Beirut was shocked. Given your true power, you should have been able to easily kill him. Linley shook his head. Grandpa Beirut, everyone has been deceived by Augusta. His true power isn't even close to what we thought it was. His power is more than 10 times greater than what I had expected. He isn't much weaker than me at all. Even if I fought with him to the death, it's uncertain as to who would be the one to perish. More importantly, the chief sovereign of fate apparently owes him a favor. Have you heard of this matter? The chief sovereign of fate owes Augusta a favor. Beirut shook his head. I'm not too sure about that. I've only been a sovereign for 20,000 years, after all. I have the feeling that Augusta wasn't lying. Linley laughed helplessly. All right. We've been waiting and enduring for so many years, we'll just wait for a while longer. Now that I've fused with my wind-type sovereign spark, I'm going to establish a divine plane of wind and increase my insights in the wind as well. Perhaps it will also help me improve my level of understanding with regards to fusing separate laws as well. Beirut nodded. It seemed as though this was the only option. However, Beirut wasn't worried. Given Linley's potential, he had a chance to surpass even the 4 chief sovereigns of the edicts, much less Augusta. Only, he needed time. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 23, 12-Winged Angel. Hey, Grandpa Beirut, why are the 4 clan leaders here? Linley looked towards Beirut, puzzled. Linley's divine sense had easily detected that Gislason and the rest of the 4 were within his estate. Only, there were in the east gardens of the estate. Oh, about that, Beirut said awkwardly. Linley, when you went to kill Augusta, I thought that this matter would be resolved without a hitch. And I also knew that Gislason and the others had always wanted to take revenge for their 4 ancestors. Thus, I told them in advance, so as to let them be happy about this. Linley was stunned. He didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Are they waiting for my good news? Linley truly didn't know whether he should laugh or do something. Beirut tugged at his beard, coughing twice. After I told them, they were extremely excited. They simply couldn't wait, so they decided to stay in your estate, so that they could immediately come find you once you returned. I imagine, the guards and the maids of the estate, upon seeing you return, have already informed the 4 of them. They will be arriving soon. Without a quiet hall. Gislason and the Vermilion Bird Matriarch were both seated. The White Tiger Patriarch was frowning and pacing back and forth, while the Black Tortoise Patriarch was standing at the doorway, anxiousness in his eyes. Elder brother, when will Linley return? The Black Tortoise Patriarch couldn't help but turn and speak in a deep, booming voice. Sovereigns move extremely quickly. Based on my calculations, it should be soon. Stop standing there at the doorway and sit down. Calm down and wait patiently. Gislason urged. How can I possibly sit down at a time like this? The Black Tortoise Patriarch had a hint of impatience on his face. Clearly, he was quite frustrated and uneasy. The Vermilion Bird Matriarch, seated next to Gislason, let out a helpless chuckle. Elder brother, stop criticizing third brother. Even I, sitting here, don't feel calm in the slightest. Sovereigns are extremely fast, and so today he will definitely return. I wonder if Linley was able to succeed or not. Lord Beirut said it himself. Gislason said. Given Lord Beirut's temperament, would he say something he wasn't confident of? Right. The others all acknowledged this. Despite that, however, the four clan leaders still felt nervousness in their hearts. Patriarch, Patriarch. Right at this moment, a figure flew over at high speed. Whoosh. Gislason and the Vermilion Bird Matriarch all suddenly stood up, and the four clan leaders looked towards the maid who was flying over. The maid called out hurriedly from afar, Lord Linley has returned. He is at Lord Beirut's estate. Swoosh. Streaks of light flashed past, and the four figures disappeared from within the hall. Beneath the large tree, next to the stone table, Linley and Beirut were currently seated, facing each other. They are coming. Linley took a sip of wine, then let out a resigned laugh. This is all my fault. Beirut shook his head, letting out a resigned, awkward chuckle. To be honest, I still don't understand. The chief sovereign of light is a chief sovereign, but not a paragon. How could it be that his power was 10 times greater than what we predicted it to be? The divine light plane has never won 10 consecutive rounds in the planar wars. Unless, Augusta has a sovereign clone. This was Beirut's judgment. Linley pondered for a long time, but could only come to this conclusion as well. But this seemed to be impossible. The chances are quite low. Linley shook his head. I've met more than 60 sovereigns by now. Not a single one of them shares the same aura as the chief sovereign of light. If the chief sovereign of light had a sovereign clone, how could he possibly manage to hide it from the other chief sovereigns? The chief sovereigns of death and destruction were born with the creation of the planes themselves. Even if others might be fooled, those two would not. Beirut nodded as well. What, exactly, was the reason for the chief sovereign of light to be more than 10 times as powerful as they had predicted? Linley. A frantic voice rang out. Linley turned to look. He saw 4 streaks of light surge forward, then solidify into 4 figures. It was Gislason and the other 3 clan leaders. The stable, reliable Gislason, the grim, callous white tiger patriarch, the wise, intelligent vermilion bird matriarch, the taciturn, reserved black tortoise patriarch. All of them were staring towards Linley with blazing, eager eyes. Has the chief sovereign of light been killed? The vermilion bird matriarch couldn't help but ask. Linley and Beirut shared a glance, and then Linley laughed bitterly. Gislason, I've disappointed you. I wasn't able to kill Augusta. Linley didn't explain further. Gislason and the other 3 were stunned. And then, they let out forlorn, awkward smiles. Linley. Gislason bowed. I know that for Lord Beirut to tell us about it meant that he had felt a certain degree of confidence. This time was a failure. We very much would like to know, Lord Linley, will you kill the chief sovereign of light in the future? The other 3 clan leaders immediately looked towards Linley. Linley's divine sense stretched across the entire Skirite Mountains. Given the power of his divine sense, if there were any other sovereigns watching, they wouldn't be able to avoid drawing his attention. I'm uncertain as to exactly when I will kill him. But once I have enough power, I will. Linley said solemnly. Gislason and the other 3 looked at each other, then smiled gratefully towards Linley. Thank you. The 4 all bowed slightly. No need. I'm a member of the 4 Divine Beasts clan as well, after all. Linley let out a low sigh. Actually, the grateful look in the eyes of Gislason and the others only made him feel even guiltier. After all, he hadn't killed Augusta yet. All right. Beirut laughed. The 4 of you can go back and rest. The 4 Divine Beasts clan has been able to wait 20,000 years for vengeance, there's no need to be impatient now. Beirut could sense that things were a bit awkward right now between the 4 clan leaders, himself, and Linley. It was best to have them leave for now. Gislason and the other 3 immediately left. This time, Ugh. Beirut laughed self-mockingly. Their awkwardness just now, that was completely my doing. It isn't your fault. After all, I still have yet to understand how the chief sovereign of light could have been more than 10 times as powerful as we had anticipated. What caused this? Linley suddenly frowned. Grandpa Beirut. I also discovered two particularly special things. The first is that Augustus' physical strength is very powerful. Although it is inferior to mine, he's still very powerful. Secondly, Augustus' soul defense is also very powerful. Augusta had been struck by Linley's sword intent, but his soul didn't seem react to it at all. Beirut, hearing this, felt puzzled as well. His body is extremely strong, and his soul is extremely strong as well? Augusta, what is his secret? Beirut mused softly. If we can't figure it out, we might as well stop thinking about it. Linley changed the subject. Grandpa Beirut. What I'm worried the most about is my mother. However, I have no memories of my mother at all, nor do I know the spiritual aura of my mother. Even if I stretched my divine sense across the divine light plane, I wouldn't know which angel is my mother. Even if his mother was standing right in front of him, he probably wouldn't recognize her. This is quite troublesome. Beirut let out a helpless laugh. When your mother was alive, I swept her with my divine sense. Only, why would I pay any particular attention to an ordinary mortal? Thus, I have no memories of your mother's soul aura. Grandpa Beirut. Linley said, worried. I know that the angels are divided into 2 winged angels, 4 winged angels, and even 12 winged angels. What sort of angel should my mother be? Linley was worried that his mother was already dead. It must be understood that most low-level angels were sent to descend upon material planes. Those low-level angels could die at any time. What sort of angel is your mother? Let me ask you this, when your mother's soul was offered to the sovereign, did the Radiant Church receive any sort of reward? Beirut suddenly asked. They did. Linley's eyes lit up, and he hurriedly said, based on what I heard, the Radiant Church itself received an astronomical reward. Even King Clady, the one who offered my mother to the Radiant Church, was rewarded by having his strength increased from the 8th rank to the 9th rank. Oh! Beirut's eyes lit up, and he immediately laughed. Linley, angels are divided into 6 ranks. The lower 3 ranks are all saints, while the higher 3 ranks are deities. Generally speaking, they are determined by the purity of the offered soul. Only when a church in a material plane offers a soul that can become a deity will it be rewarded. Linley couldn't help but nod. Right. Angels were numerous beyond measure. If the offered soul could only become a saint, of course there wouldn't be any reward. But the size of the rewards are also determined by the purity of the soul. Generally speaking, 8 winged angels are equivalent to demigods. Demigods, being the weakest type of deities, naturally won't result in significant rewards. At most, the rewards would simply be encouraging in nature. Souls that are able to be transformed into 10 winged angels will result in slightly better rewards. After all, gods aren't anything either. Linley nodded. The number of demigods and gods the infernal realm had was simply countless. Actually, the most powerful of angels are the 12 winged angels, and every single one of them is extremely powerful, generally at the 7-star fiend level. Beirut said solemnly. What? Linley couldn't help but cry out in shock. High gods didn't really matter, but 7-star fiends and ordinary high gods were completely on different levels. How is it that 12 winged angels are so powerful? Linley didn't understand. Beirut laughed. I only learned this when chatting with the Blood-Ridge Sovereign, Bosan. Do you know that angels are born in the angelic resurrection pools? I've heard of it. Linley said hurriedly. Just recently, when chatting with Augusta, Linley had heard of the angelic resurrection pools. There are a total of 128 angelic resurrection pools. They are controlled by and divided up amongst the 7 sovereigns of the divine light plane. The chief sovereign holds 64 of them by himself. The 2 intermediate sovereigns control 16 each. The 4 lesser sovereigns control 8. Beirut explained carefully. Angels are actually a human-shaped weapon. Their souls, after being reborn through the angelic resurrection plane, will not have any of their past memories. In addition, they will be absolutely loyal to the sovereigns of light. They won't feel any selfishness at all. Linley nodded slightly. After the transformation, they will no longer be able to gain any insights into the laws, nor be able to increase their level of understanding. Beirut sighed. If, after the transformation, they are saint-level angels, then they will forever be saint-level angels. They are unable to gain any insights, and so naturally, the profound mysteries they use to attack do not come from their own insights. Beirut said. Every single angelic resurrection pool is linked to the soul of its sovereign. The sovereigns will infuse the angelic resurrection pool with some of their own powerful attacks. Only, there are different levels of power for each angelic resurrection pool. Low-level angelic resurrection pools can only contain low-level techniques, and so the angels they produce are weak angels. The high-level angelic resurrection pools, however, contain attacks that generally involve the fusion of 4 or 5 profound mysteries, because that is the sort of attack which sovereigns themselves use. Beirut explained, thus, the angels birthed from the high-level angelic resurrection pools, the 12-winged angels, generally will have supreme attacks that involve the fusion of 4 or even 5 profound mysteries. Linley now understood. No wonder every single 12-winged angel was so powerful. It was because they didn't have to gain any insights, they were born understanding those powerful attacks. The 12-winged angels are very powerful. In the past, when I publicized the existence of the Necropolis of the gods, I attracted quite a few people, amongst which included 7 star fiends of the infernal realm and even 12-winged angels. I imagine that the 12-winged angels also wanted to seize a sovereign artifact. After all, the number of sovereign artifacts which the sovereign can bestow is limited. Beirut sighed, in that battle, the power which the 12-winged angels display was absolutely not inferior to that of the 7 star fiends. The angelic resurrection pool. How terrifying! It is actually able to directly produce 12-winged angels that are no weaker than 7 star fiends. Linley sighed. It isn't that simple. The conditions necessary for a soul to be able to support the energy of a 12-winged angel are extremely stringent. The creation of every single 12-winged angel is fairly difficult, and thus if a material plane is able to offer a soul that is capable of becoming a 12-winged angel, the offering church will naturally receive an enormous reward. Beirut sighed as he spoke. The Radiant Church was so happy as to increase the King of Fenlay's power. I imagine, your mother's soul must have been truly pure. The type of angel she was reborn as should be the most powerful type, a 12-winged angel. Book 21, The Peak, Chapter 24, 9 rounds. 12-winged angel. Linley let out a slightly relieved sigh. The lower the level an angel was, the faster they would die. It is very hard to birth a 12-winged angel. The 12-winged angels which exist have been slowly accumulated over the course of countless years. The sovereigns of light won't casually dispatch 12-winged angels out to take on missions. Sometimes, 1,000,000 years will pass without a single 12-winged angel being activated. Your mother became a 12-winged angel less than 10,000 years ago. The chances of her death are virtually negligible. Beirut laughed. Only now did Linley completely relax. Haha, Grandpa Beirut, your logical reasoning has calmed me down quite a bit. Linley now felt more than enough self-confidence in his ability to rescue his mother. Right. Grandpa Beirut. Linley waved his hand, and an Earth-type sovereign spark, glowing with an earthen yellow light, appeared. This is an unexpected reward that I acquired. A sovereign spark. Beirut was startled. Linley laughed and nodded. Augusta and I went together to the divine light plane. Who would have imagined that the chief sovereign of lightning, Hurley, followed us in as well? Even the other 5 chief sovereigns of the laws followed us from far away. When I attacked Augusta, Hurley suddenly sneak attacked me, wanting to kill me and seize my Overgod artifact. I immediately hit him with a backhanded sword attack. Beirut instantly started to laugh. So, you acquired his sovereign spark. Right. Hurley's lightning-type chief sovereign clone fled quite quickly. I just wanted to teach him a small lesson anyhow, and so I destroyed his earth-type sovereign clone. Linley frowned. Now, the question is, who should I give this earth-type sovereign spark to? Grandpa Beirut, what do you think? The earth-type sovereign spark. Beirut frowned. Blue Fire can use it, but if we give it to him, his power will only rise slightly, to the intermediate sovereign level or so. It won't change the overall strategic balance of power much. Ideally, we should find a high god. However, a high god who trains in the laws of the earth, it's going to be quite hard to find such a person within your Barak clan for now. Linley laughed in resignation. The Barak clan had quite a few high gods, but they fused with divine sparks. A high god who had relied solely on himself to train to that level, and in the laws of the earth? There really wasn't a single one yet. To fuse a sovereign spark, there was just a single precondition. One had to have trained independently to the high god level. What's the rush? Beirut laughed. Just keep it for now. When the time comes, if there is a suitable candidate, you can hand it over then. Haha. All right. I'll just use this sovereign spark to serve as a precious ancestral heirloom for the Barak clan. Linley laughed loudly. Grandpa Beirut, make the notifications. Have the people of Dragonblood Castle who are willing to come to the infernal realm all come over. Linley had now completely guaranteed the safety of his family and friends in the infernal realm. The chief sovereigns who were more powerful than Linley had no grudges against him. Even if they did, they wouldn't be so shameless as the chief sovereign of light, who had threatened him with the annihilation of his clan. That might be for the best. Beirut laughed and nodded. During these past 5 millennia, they've been quite bored in the Yulon Plain. After all, in terms of experts, the infernal realm has far more, and there are also many more places to go adventuring in the infernal realm. Linley was in no hurry to establish his divine plane of wind. He stayed in the infernal realm, bringing over his family and friends. During this period of time, Linley also focused on his training, and on merging and fusing the separate laws. Occasionally, he would spend some time with his family and friends. The year after Linley and Augusta's battle was also the year when Linley's reputation expanded the most extravagantly. Linley had heavily injured the chief sovereign of light, and with a single sword blow, killed the earth-type sovereign clone of the chief sovereign of lightning, Hurley, terrifying Hurley into instant, panicked flight. This battle prowess was naturally spread to everyone else by the 5 other chief sovereigns of the laws. This information was simply too astonishing. Soon, virtually all the sovereigns became aware of it. Linley's status instantly eclipsed that of the other 7 elemental chief sovereigns, and was only second to the 4 supreme experts, chief sovereigns of the edicts. And so, in the span of a single short year, more than 10 sovereigns had come to pay their respects to Linley. When sovereigns met, they too would eat some fruit, drink some wine, and casually banter. Roughly a year after the battle with Augusta. The Infernal Realm. Blood Ridge Province. Indigo Prefecture. The Skirite Mountains. Linley's sovereign estate. Within this quiet, secluded estate, soft grass covered the ground. Linley was dressed in a long, loose robe. He sat in the meditative position as the wind blew past him, brushing against the strands of his hair. A figure slowly took form in front of Linley, as though it had teleported there. Linley opened his eyes. He saw that this person was a man dressed in long, blood-red robes. It was the Blood Ridge sovereign, Bosan. He laughed, Bosan, why have you come to my place? Not long ago, Bosan had met with Linley, and at that time, Linley had wanted to address him as Mr. Bosan, but no matter what he said, the blood-rich sovereign refused to be addressed like that. He even wanted to address Linley as Lord. After all, Linley's power, even amongst the chief sovereigns, was extremely great. In the end, both took a step back. They viewed each other as friends, and so addressed each other by name. Must I have a reason for coming? The blood-rich sovereign smiled as he sat down next to him. Actually, today, I really did have an important reason for coming. Speak. Linley listened attentively. The blood-rich sovereign laughed. You still have no emissaries, right? Why are you thinking about this? Linley didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. How is it your business, Bosan, if I choose to accept emissaries or not? That's not it. The blood-rich sovereign shook his head. To tell you the truth, every trillion years, there is a session of the planar wars, and each of the planar wars have a total of 5 rounds. 3 rounds have already passed, and roughly 600 years in the future, the 4th planar war is going to begin. Which 2 planes are doing battle? Linley asked, curious. Our infernal realm and the celestial realm. The blood-rich sovereign said solemnly. Linley, the upcoming 4th round of the planar wars is extremely important. Because, in the 9 previous competitions, the celestial realm won 9 rounds in a row. What? Linley was startled. Linley understood that after becoming a sovereign, there were 3 ways for gaining an additional portion of will. The first was to fuse with another sovereign spark. The second was to become a paragon. The third was for one's side, in the planar wars, to win 10 times in a row. But of course, another method was to become a soul mutate like Linley. Only, this sort of unique situation wasn't applicable to all sovereigns. If I remember correctly, long ago, the celestial realm won 10 rounds in a row already. Linley said with a frown. Exactly. The blood-rich sovereign said hurriedly. The 7 sovereigns of fate have already received a reward, and so the other sovereigns don't want them to see them receive a reward again. In particular, we don't want to see the chief sovereign of fate increase in strength yet again. He's already strong enough. Linley nodded slightly. Ever since the creation of the universe, every time one side wins 9 times in a row, all of the other planes will join together to prevent them from winning a 10th time. The blood-rich sovereign said. Generally speaking, when all the other planes join forces, the chances for success will be extremely high. Over the course of countless years, however, there was one failure. That time, the celestial realm won, and thus the 7 sovereigns of fate received the reward. The blood-rich sovereign said solemnly, this time, no matter what, we can't let them win again. This is the order that came from the chief sovereign of destruction himself. Linley couldn't help but laugh. Most likely, as far as the chief sovereign of destruction was concerned, his only real opponent was the chief sovereign of fate. What does not wanting him to win have to do with finding emissaries? Linley laughed. If we don't want him to win, then our side needs to find enough experts. The blood-rich sovereign shook his head. But many experts already know how extremely savage this particular planar war will be. It will be absolutely berserk. Thus, many commander-level experts are not willing to participate in it. Linley laughed and nodded. All of the planes would be going all out, and the celestial realm would be going all out as well. One could completely imagine how savage this battle would be. Unless one was completely confident in one's powers or unless one was tired of life, one probably wouldn't participate. How is it that the commanders know how important this battle is? Linley said, puzzled. The reward for winning 10 battles should be a secret amongst sovereigns. Based on past precedents. The blood-rich sovereign let out an awkward laugh. In this sort of berserk battle, both sides will go all out. They will come up with any and all measures that can allow their side to grow more powerful, in a manner which does not violate the Pact of Sovereigns. Thus, both sides will bestow every single participant in this planar war with Sovereign's might. Every single person will receive 2 drops. Linley was stupefied. Mad. They had all gone mad. If every single person who entered the planar battlefield was bestowed with 2 drops of Sovereign's might, then even a commander-level expert, upon suffering an attack from 10 high gods, would probably perish. Although these commanders don't know about the secret behind the 10 consecutive battles, they do know that all of the high gods who are participating will be bestowed Sovereign's might. How many commanders would dare participate? The blood-rich sovereign laughed bitterly. Originally, we didn't want to hand out that much Sovereign's might either. But if we don't and the other side does, doesn't that mean that we will lose for sure? There's nothing that we can do. Linley understood the predicament they were in. The Sovereigns all knew that giving each participant 2 drops of Sovereign's might was simply too insane, but they had no choice. In the battles in the stellar corridors, a group of commander-level experts, especially armed with sovereign artifacts, will be extremely effective. The blood-rich sovereign said solemnly. Thus, what the chief sovereign of destruction desires is for you to acquire 6 emissaries. According to the rules, a lesser sovereign can take on 2 emissaries, an intermediate sovereign can take on 4, and a chief sovereign can take on 8. Since you have 3 lesser sovereign clones, you can take on 6. Linley nodded to acknowledge that he understood. But I haven't even made any sovereign artifacts yet. Linley said helplessly. Sovereign artifacts, to us, are something that we can create every 10,000 years or so. They aren't that important. The blood-rich sovereign laughed. Almost all of the sovereigns have lived for hundreds of millions of years. Only, the Pact of Sovereigns forbids sovereigns from giving their emissaries more than a single artifact, so as to maintain balance amongst the deities. Linley, if you don't have any sovereign artifacts, I can give 10 or so to you as a gift. The blood-rich sovereign said disdainfully. In the infernal realm, there were many deities who made their living by forging divine artifacts. It was the same principle. To sovereigns, forging sovereign artifacts was something that only required a bit of time and effort. Fine. Since you've said all these things, fine. Linley laughed, then nodded. But then Linley said, puzzled, Boson, I truly don't understand. Given that all of these sovereigns are joining forces, why are we worried about the celestial realm winning? How can they possibly win? The blood-rich sovereign nodded. The celestial realm has always been the most powerful of the 4 higher realms. In addition, the edicts of fate have strange, bizarre attacks. Thus, during the planar wars, the celestial realm often gains victory. Normally, we don't care that much, but once there are 9 victories in a row, then we cannot be careless. For the sake of this 10th battle, based on what we know, they have already prepared an extremely powerful tactic. The blood-rich sovereign laughed bitterly. In addition, the chances of success for this tactic are extremely high. What sort of tactic? Linley said, puzzled. The chief sovereign of fate will go ask the chief sovereign of light, Augusta, for assistance. He will borrow large numbers of 12 winged angels. The blood-rich sovereign said solemnly. Linley, you should know that in the battle above the Stellar River, the main reason one side loses is due to a lack of morale. One side is rooted. Anyone with a consciousness is susceptible to fear, can be rooted. Linley nodded. He knew that an army being rooted was like a mountain toppling. When 2 sides were fighting in the stellar corridor, given the width of the corridor, only so many soldiers could battle at once. Once one side was rooted, even if the soldiers in the back had yet to even fight, they would still be affected. But 12 winged angels are different. They are absolutely devoted to the chief sovereign of light. When the chief sovereign of light gives the order, even if the order is for them to throw their lives away, they won't hesitate at all. The blood-rich sovereign said helplessly. In addition, these 12 winged angels all have at least the power of a 7-star fiend. Some are even close to commanders in strength. Think about it. This is a group of powerful experts who have no fear of death at all. In addition, they are able to form into all sorts of battle formations and work together in extremely marvelous ways. They don't harbor any trace of individual desires within them at all. How astonishingly powerful then would an army like this be in the planar wars? The blood-rich sovereign sighed. Fortunately, the birth of every single 12-winged angel is a laborious affair. To accumulate sufficient 12-winged angels requires an extremely long period of time. In the past, the chief sovereign of fate asked the chief sovereign of light twice to borrow these angels. He didn't want to borrow them too often, because it is simply too hard to create a 12-winged angel. Linley couldn't help but nod in acknowledgement. Fearless. Selfless. Good teamwork. Powerful. In the stellar corridor, due to their fearlessness, there was no way that they would be routed. If you wanted to win, you had to annihilate every single 12-winged angel. This sort of army was indeed terrifying. Because of this, the chief sovereign of fate has, in the past, owed the chief sovereign of light 2 favors. The blood-rich sovereign laughed calmly. In the past, the divine light plane, since it didn't have many experts, won fairly rarely. Those 12-winged angels are simply too rare, and so they can only be used as trump cards, and can only be used once or twice. Thus, Augusta isn't able to use them for himself. He chose to instead exchange them for favors from the chief sovereign of fate. The blood-rich sovereign sighed, all I know is that once, he called in one of the favors to ask the chief sovereign of fate to help him. It was because of the chief sovereign of fate's help, along with his own luck, that he was able to acquire that Overgod weapon. Linley now understood. So the chief sovereign of fate actually owed him 2 favors. One was used up, while the other remains. Linley now completely understood. It seemed as though the chief sovereign of light hadn't lied to him at all. Originally, if he truly had chased into the celestial realm, the enraged chief sovereign of light probably truly would have asked the chief sovereign of fate to kill him. However, this time, the chief sovereign of fate is going to end up owing him yet another favor. The blood-rich sovereign laughed calmly. Over the course of countless years, Augusta has accumulated yet another batch of 12-winged angels. Most likely, he will go participate. Augusta truly is lucky, he took over both of the angelic resurrection pools which are able to give birth to 12-winged angels. In addition, he accumulates pure souls from the material realms. By patiently waiting, he is able to slowly build up an army of 12-winged angels. Alas, this army of fearless, deity-level angels, they truly are troublesome. Oh, yes, they are quite Linley was laughing, but suddenly. Linley's face froze, and then instantly turned ashen. Linley, what is it? Boson saw that Linley's face was looking strange. You said, he would accumulate a batch of 12-winged angels, and then, send them to the planar battlefield. Linley stared at Boson. All of them. Yes, essentially all of them. The blood-rich sovereign said, puzzled. What is it? That look on your face. I'm fine. Boson, I need to calm down. You can go back now. Linley's mind was currently in a state of complete chaos. Oh. Although puzzled, the blood-rich sovereign didn't ask any more questions, instead leaving. Within the vast, empty courtyard, Linley was the only person remaining. When virtually every member in this batch of 12-winged angels is sent to the planar battlefield, in the midst of that wild, savage battle, most likely nearly all of them will perish. It would be amazing if even 10% survived. Linley's mind was in a state of chaos. My mother, she should be amongst them. if she is sent to the planar battlefield? Linley was terrified. What should I do? Linley was in a state of complete chaos.